Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Is this what an evening board meeting looks like now? Emily greeted her husband's secretary at the office door with an unkind smile as she gasped for breath, buttoning her blouse. "Let me pass, my dear." Like an impending thunderstorm, she walked into the office of her husband, who, with one hand hastily removed from the desk the effects of recent passion, and pulled on pants. "Can I help you? Is it cold?" Emily asked, folding her arms across her chest. Everything inside her was standing, burning, and resentful. This man, on whom she had spent 10 years of her life, oblivious to her own dreams and ambitions, now stood before her with his pants half pulled down and could not utter a word. "Emily." "No comment." She interrupted him. "How was it?" "By all accounts, the director's meeting went well." "Emily, stop it. I can explain everything." He finally buckled his belt and moved toward her. "Stay where you are," abruptly cried out the girl from the surprised trader, froze in place. "What for?" His eyebrows drew together. "Don't make a scene." I wanted to throw tantrums, and I wanted to vent my anger on him. But my natural restraint got the better of me. "I'll wait for you at home." She turned on her heels and walked out of the office with her head held high. Here she was at last. "Are you going to cook dinner at all?" Miranda's mother-in-law was very kind. She met Emily in the lobby. "While David's plowing, you're driving around to your friends." Yes, David really earned it on his own. Emily looked at the 60-year-old woman, just on fire at work. "What?" Her mother-in-law's eyebrows rose indignantly. "Tell your son when he comes home that I'm waiting for him upstairs, and someone else will take care of dinner tonight." And Emily, with a short nod, headed for the stairs. My mother-in-law was taken aback. She looked after her daughter-in-law, who had never allowed herself such liberties before today. It had been 3 years since Miranda had moved into her son's house under the pretext of hypertension, and she had never been spoken to in that tone before. What kind of fly bit her? It's a worthless girl. The daughter of the school German teacher. Never liked her. And once David got the idea to marry her, well, they met at the institute, fell in love, and then broke up, looking for a mate from her circle. How Miranda dreamed of marrying David to the daughter of her crony friend, the Harris of the jewelry business. Instead, her son married this homeless beggar, and even a red degree in design didn't make her a more attractive match, finding herself in her room. Emily collapsed on the bed and closed her eyes. More resentment flooded her tears, rolling from her eyes on their own. She had been almost as hurt when her mother had died. She had burned so quickly that the girl hadn't had time to say goodbye to her properly. It had been 2 years since that terrible day when, holding her only daughter's hand, that heroic woman left the world, for Emily did not know her father. Her mother said he died before she was born. She had no more relatives left in the world. Wendy pulled her along on her meager teacher's salary. While Emily was in school and in her first year of college, she supplemented her main job with part-time tutoring and scrubbing floors at the local supermarket. Sometimes her daughter wouldn't see her for days. She would come home, exhausted, tired. But she never complained about life. She had no men, although quite a few suitors tried to take the vacant place next to her. The woman was intelligent, beautiful, and lonely. Emily knew that her father was her only love, whose fidelity she kept all her life, sometimes falling into a longing for her mother. The girl dialed her home phone number and listened to the long, dull ringing tone. And now she was 30 years old. No kids, no job, and now no husband. Emily knew she would never be able to forgive this betrayal to him. Truth be told, their marriage had been bursting at the seams for a long time. They married for mutual love right after university. 3 months later, David's father died, and her husband inherited a lucrative construction and landscaping business. He then made it clear to her that she had to quit the job Emily had taken in her 3rd year and take care of her home and not think about any career. At the time, it seemed to her that this was fair, and she willingly plunged into the family hassle with the hope that soon there will be children, but they did not appear. All the necessary examinations and procedures were done. They even began to consider their options, but everything changed in an instant. Miranda came into their home, and Emily stopped feeling like the master of her own life. Yes, she still made repairs, planted flowers in the garden, and cooked crazy lunches and dinners, a server and a chair like in Lennon's restaurant. Except that the feeling of safety and security was no longer there. Emily stood up from her bed and wiped away the tears flowing in a waterfall. She looked at the clock on the bed on the nightstand. The hand showed 9:00 p.m. To get her mind off herself and relax a little, she headed for the shower. Barely a girl threw off her clothes and turned on the water. The front door slammed on the floor below. Damn it, we have to hurry, she thought, and just in case, she clicked the lock on the door as well. While Emily stood under the hot streams, her thoughts slowly came to order. The sobs subsided, and she put a terry towel over her ear and threw on a robe. She stepped out of the shower. The bedroom was still empty. Emily walked over to the mirror, where a slender, brown-haired woman with a mole above her lip was looking at her. A short, trimmed leading hair picturesquely framed her flippers, her face. Opening her closet, she pulled out jeans and a t-shirt and turned into them and left the room. There was no one in the hall, the living room, or the kitchen, so no one had come. That Miranda was out for the night, probably on a broomstick, Emily thought, and grinned bitterly. In the living room, she walked over to the antique sideboard, where her pride, a magnificent service made of the finest medical porcelain, was displayed. She had bought it during her honeymoon in the German town of Worms. David wondered at the time why you couldn't buy that kind of junk instead of carrying it halfway across Europe. But beautiful tableware, especially vintage ones, was Emily's passion. Now she would have to leave it all behind, for David would probably not let her take anything. Not because he needs it. It's just the way he is. There were footsteps in the hallway, and the next second she heard Emily's husband's voice. "You're the one." How she wanted to throw something at him. "I'm right here." She turned to him. "I want to explain, don't I?" He started to ramble as he sat down on the couch. "Come here, please." He pointed to the armchairs beside her. Emily went silently and sat down in the place indicated. She wanted to look him in the eye, to ask why. But she silently stared at the newspaper lying on the coffee table. She just did not have the strength to look at him. "You'll stay silent." His voice suddenly sounded irritated. "Really? You're not going to ask him anything? Or don't you care?" She finally found the strength to look at him. She saw a strange man standing in front of her. "Ask me what?" She grinned. "When did it begin?" "I'm guessing, because your evening meetings and business trips started exactly 3 months ago. Maybe earlier, though." "What's her name?" "I know that too. Helen. I think I know that she's 23. But you know the reason." David leaned back and put one hand on the back of the couch, showing he wasn't embarrassed. "I'm at a loss for ideas." Her voice trembled treacherously, but she pulled herself together. "Yes, because you've become so boring you want to forget. You're always in the kitchen or running around and taking your stupid China junk. Damn it, there's nothing to talk to you about except your pink tastes and your girlfriend's shoes. You only have wacky maiden, a tank with a curious nose and a sharp tongue." Maiden tank would not like it, Emily thought. She listened, and anger boiled in her soul with resentment. The girl could not utter a word, though she should have reminded this man that she had sacrificed a successful career, the dream of one day opening her own business for the sake of their marriage. About the fact that for 3 years now she had tolerated in the house his bored and selfish mother, who tried in every way to humiliate her. "Have you finished even?" Emily asked. Only her tightly pressed lips, which defeated her knuckles, indicated that she was very tense. "No," he was quiet for a second. "Helen is 5 weeks pregnant, to be exact. I think Mom will be happy she's finally going to have a grandchild or granddaughter." He spoke in such a casual tone, as if they were discussing a menu, a named lunch. It was a punch in the gut. Emily closed her eyes and tears ran down her cheeks. What a bastard you are. How could I have lived with you for so many years and not notice it as much as I could? His words literally exuded venom. My darling, 2 years of a relationship and 8 years of marriage have made you a woman of high society, a rich woman. You know very well how much your pastime is worth. Besides, you escaped the poverty that you and your mother ate your one bedroom with the alcoholic neighbors behind the wall. After this phrase, Emily could not stand it and stood forward and slapped him with a resounding slap. Oh, you bitch. The retaliatory slap was immediate, and Emily fell into a black abyss. In the morning, she called the only person she had left close to her after her mother left and David betrayed her. Hi, Evelyn. Emily tried her best to make her voice sound smooth and relaxed, but it still shook. We'll be able to meet right away today. What's the matter? Her friend's anxious voice made her smile. It happened, and I really need to talk to you. Of course, I'm getting dressed now. Evelyn's dark glasses raised the precipice in surprise when they met a couple of hours later at their favorite coffee shop. This was new, considering that it was raining outside. Emily sat down across from her and silently removed her glasses. Her friend's eyes were red and bruised. My mother's woman. What is it? Emily, from where? From there, the girl answered dryly. Life is changing, people are changing. Or opens up, maybe. Is it really, David? Emily took a deep breath and told Evelyn. Yesterday's story meant that she was pregnant. She flopped down in her chair and looked intently at her friend. What are you going to do? Forgive him. If you do, I'll interrupt you myself. Emily averted her eyes and looked outside, where we had a dreary October rain. Leaving. How can you live with a man who betrayed you, who dared to raise his hand? But you sue him for his part of the estate. Evelyn popped another sugar cube into her latte. This whole thing makes even me stressed out. I don't think I'm going to make it. Yesterday, when I woke up from his slap, she hobbled off. My beautiful spouse informed me that I was leaving home with what I came in with. That is, as you understand, without everything. He did, however, allow me to take some clothes and some jewelry that he had given me. The car, of course, remains in the future wife and mother of his child. That's exactly what he said. What a bastard. Don't worry. We'll figure something out with the job. The most important thing is to leave this bastard with dignity. By the way, you can move in with me. Emily gave her a paved smile. Thank you, sweetheart. But I'll go back to my mom's apartment. But nobody's lived there for years. Can you imagine what's there now? That's where Mom is. She's there in everything in the books, on the shelf, in the picture frames in the air. And it's the only place in the whole world where I want to be right now. Really, she herself didn't notice the tears flowing from her eyes. Evelyn simply held her hand in silence as she mourned her pain and resentment. Finally, Emily resolutely wiped her tears away with her palms and smiled weakly. So stop feeling sorry for yourself. She clapped her hands on her hips. Let's ask for the bill. You don't have to go to the apartment and clean it up. I'll go with you, of course. But you have work to do. I'll ask right now. Evelyn, with her chowder pen, pulled out the latest iPhone from the bowels of her bag and dialed her boss's number. Thank you, silently, Emily whispered as she made up a story to her boss about her sore throat and the beginning of her fever. They brought the bill and the girls. Relaxed, they headed for the exit. The front door lock barely clicked, and a streak of light fell on the hallway floor. Emily became agitated. She hadn't been here much since her mother's death, and now she felt uneasy. Once inside, her friends smelled the distinctive smell of an uninhabited room. It smelled sad and empty. Emily, with a familiar motion, turned on the light and walked into the kitchen. Evelyn followed her. It was, as always, clean, and the back of the kitchen set, a gift from her son-in-law for his anniversary, and slightly ruined by dust. It was practically empty except for the drawers that held the old dinner service. The refrigerator door was open, as if someone had just taken out milk, and one of the chairs had been pulled out from under the table. Emily thought she was about to hear footsteps in the hallway, and her mother would come in. They will all sit down together, as they used to, at the round table, pour tea from the soul, and talk about the little things that life really consists of. Evelyn, catching her friend's mood, broke into a loud cough and began rattling the cupboard in search of the kettle. While she was tinkering in the kitchen, Emily walked into the room. Here everything remained the same as it had been under her mother's reclining couch, dust covered with sheets. The simple but elegant wallpaper that the two of them had glued together the week before they had learned the terrible diagnosis. Emily repeatedly offered to buy her mother a flat-screen modern TV, but she always flatly refused. Apparently, Emily got her love of vintage things from her mother. She opened the dam of her closet, where her clothes were still hanging. There was no way the girl could bring herself to part with the things that held her scent. Remembering her, she took the sleeve of her blouse in her hands, held it up to her face, and breathed in the scent of the perfume her mother had always spritzed on her wrist. God, how she missed her. She was distracted from her sad thoughts by Evelyn's voice, who informed her that she had made tea. Feeling back in the kitchen, Emily found that her friend had already managed to dust off, relive the teacups, and make tea. Discovered in the tin box above the sink, the girl smiled appreciatively at the scrolls. "What would I do without you, really, what?" She shrugged, taking a chocolate bar out of her bag. "That's how I knew. Just bought it this morning in the subway." They quickly drank tea and changed into their old clothes, began to put things in order, sweeping away the newest cobwebs from the ceiling wall, fresh to the kitchen to shine, cleaned the faience in the bathroom toilet. The girls sat down to rest. The curtains remained to be taken down, and the hardest part was rubbing the books and crystal into the walls. "I'm not taking them to you now." "You know what?" Evelyn looked enigmatically at her friend. "What's to fall in love with?" That Emily coughed in surprise. "Is that all you need?" "No, really. Do you need some good emotions right now?" The girl moved toward her friend, taking her hand. Looking into her eyes, "Worried for you." Emily shook her hand gratefully and smiled. "I can handle it. You know I'm strong. Come on, let's just get this over with." As if on cue, they both stared at the bookcases, which looked intimidating. Emily fetched a basin of warm water, and they, armed with rags, began carefully removing books from the shelves, wiping and dusting off another spine of the bindings. She smiled to herself. Her mother had amassed a whole library. It had everything, and Emily never had to look elsewhere for works from the school curriculum. Wendy had a special love for German literature. Hoffmann, Grass, Remarque, even Patrick Suskind, and even Goethe and his Faust, and Emily herself, thanks to her mother, knew almost by heart. Evelyn was humming something about herself, carrying a tray with volumes of War and Peace. Behind her, an impressive pile of dust-free folios had already landed. She was doing everything clearly and quickly, unlike her friend. Emily, on the other hand, was in a strange nirvana, giving herself to the memories that held the pages of these old and beloved books. She searched with her eyes for Goethe. It was a large antique book in German, dated 1896, and appeared in the house before Emily herself. Taking it in her hands, the girl felt a strange thrill. The yellowed pages were decrepit and soft. Somewhere along the stretches of time, she stroked the roughness and surface. Suddenly, she felt that there was something among the pages. She flipped through them with her fingers and saw a small envelope wedged between pages 50 and 51. Carefully taking it in her hands, Emily felt that in the envelope there was something hard and heavy in addition to the paper. Her hands were sweating with excitement. She looked at Evelyn, who paid no attention to her, and pondered. To tell her or not, it must be about her family. Finally, she made up her mind. "Evelyn, come here for a minute." Evelyn was distracted by the cleaning of the bindings and headed toward her friend. "What have you got here?" "Wow," she glanced at the envelope. "And what is this letter?" Emily shrugged her shoulders. "I do not know." "Well, I'll open it then, Lord." Evelyn stood sideways at her arm and looked at her friend with a look as if she were a little girl. Emily nodded and opened the envelope. There was a folded piece of paper and a small gold ring with a blue stone. Wow! Evelyn jumped up and down, and with excitement Emily, completely unaware of anything, stared blankly at the piece of jewelry. She saw it for the first time and wondered where it had come from. After all, she and her mother had never had any secrets from each other. The stone was shimmering in the artificial light of the chandelier with 1,000 facets, and it looked like a real diamond. But where did the German teacher get the diamond ring? Emily was utterly confused. She and Evelyn sat down on the sofa and stared at the strange find. On the inside, there was a short inscription in German, A-S-H-A. A-S-H-A, what is A-S-H-A? Where did it come from? Oh, look, Emily. Evelyn pointed to a small badge on the same inside of the seer under the very stone. It was either a hallmark or a coat of arms. Well, very finely engraved. There's a magnifying glass. Emily perplexed at her friend. Well, to increase, seeing her confusion, explained it. Although wait, she stood up abruptly and rushed into the hallway. And a second later, she was already taking pictures of the ring on her iPhone camera. She took a few pictures and then enlarged the image as much as possible. In front of her eyes was a drawing of Rose braiding a dagger on a shield. From the looks of it, it appears to be an antique ring, Emily stated. There's no modern hallmark here. I wonder where Aunt Wendy got it. I don't know, said the girl thoughtfully. Suddenly, she remembered the piece of paper that was in the same envelope. When she unfolded it, she gasped. Her mother's handwriting. It was a letter written in German. In the upper left corner, Emily made out the floor, alas, flowery lines with an address. Germany, Rhine City, Trier, Beverly Strasse, 28A, Schwarzenberg. Holding her breath, Emily began to read you to thank God for diligently learning German under the guidance of the best teacher in the world. Dear Alex, I am writing you a letter again, which will probably remain in my books again. And I apologize in advance. I am very guilty before you, but I could not do otherwise. Believe me, I am punished in full, for being away from you is the greatest pain of my life. There's a lot you don't know. Maybe it's for the best. Otherwise, you would still be trying to find me. I really want you to be happy with love. Wendy, September 5, the year 2000. Emily was silent. Tears flowed from her eyes. Wendy, what was writing? Was it a love letter? She simply did not know. Evelyn's sobbing distracted her from her thoughts. Her friend's eyes were wet too. How romantic was that? Emily. Who's Alex? Your mom's boyfriend. She never told me about it, did she? I was 10 when she wrote that letter. My dad died before I was born. Maybe they met later. Mom loved Dad very much. She never looked at anyone else. Who is this mysterious Alex anyway? Evelyn shrugged, and Emily wondered. The letter said it wasn't the first one written or sent. Maybe there are others to be found. In the books. Let's look. The cleaning can wait. It took them 3 hours. It had long been dark outside. The rain outside the windows had turned into a downpour, but there were 2 more letters on the table in front of them. One was found in Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy. With trembling hands, Emily unfolded the first leaf. It was 5 years older. It was the same address. The handwriting was her mother's, too, but it was more fluid. The scribbles. She could tell a young girl had written it. It's been another year without you, my love. I can't bear to think of you so far away. Another woman beside you. I know your mother dreamed of this wedding, but what anguish did her dreams cost me? Don't look for me. I lost myself a long time ago. Forever yours, Wendy. Emily finished reading, and there was an awkward silence. Now I don't understand anything at all. Baby, I lost my whiskey. 1 more year, Emily repeated. 1 more. So it was before. But how? I didn't know anything about it. My head was spinning. Read it. The second one. Evelyn fidgeted impatiently on the couch. Emily unwrapped the last letter. The handwriting became different. tired and sad. On July 20, 2018, 1 week later, her mother died. The girl closed her eyes. She was suddenly afraid of what she would read in that scrap of paper. What secret would this last message reveal to her? My dear Alex, it is my last letter, my hopes to look into your eyes again. Alas, not destined to happen. 28 long years without you deprived me of strength and will to fight. I cannot tell you how much I regret listening to the voice of reason and others when I left your life. You may never know that I came home with a priceless gift for which I have tried to be happy all these years. This daughter of ours is the fruit of the most incredible, endless love that has forever settled in my heart. Yes, I am guilty of hiding, of running away, of disappearing from your life, of robbing you of the joy of being a father to Emily. I deprived her of a father's care and love. I realize now how foolish I've been to live my life hurting myself. You and Emily. She doesn't know anything. I don't have the strength to tell her. Forgive me and goodbye. Love of my life. Forever yours, Wendy. The girls sat in silence, staring into the void. The truth was revealed so suddenly, so harshly, that they could not find the right words. Emily struggled to comprehend what she had read as recently as yesterday morning. She was quietly baking cookies in her country kitchen. Everything in life was certain, clear, and predictable. No secrets, no cheating, no letters. It seemed like years had flown by since that moment. So what should I do? Emily broke the silence. She ran her hands over the priceless pieces of paper that preserved the secret of her birth. Evelyn took her hands and looked at her friend Emily seriously. Do you realize what you have just learned? You have learned that you have a real father who does not know about you. What is there to do here? Emily looked up at her. I really want to find him. But it could be that he's already. Think happy thoughts. Evelyn interrupted her. You're half German, aren't you? She laughed at her friend's amusement, and Emily smiled herself. They spent the next hour finishing cleaning up and discussing grand plans for a family reunion. A couple of days later, Emily was sitting across from David at a huge table in the lawyer's office, signing the divorce papers. Just like that, within 3 days, thanks to connections, she had become a free woman. The divorce left her with personal belongings, some jewelry, and still a sense of dignity, which she proudly carried receipts to work, along with a bottle of champagne and a box of ether. So that was it, Emily sighed. When her friend met her at the front desk of the publishing house, 9 years of marriage were a thing of the past. Evelyn hugged her tightly. Well, that's good. I never liked him. That was the plain truth. The mutual antipathy of husband and girlfriend had always left Emily utterly bewildered. 40 minutes till the end of the day. Wait a minute. Evelyn led her into her office with 1 million manuscripts lying all over the place. I don't have anywhere to be in a hurry. Feigning nonchalance, Emily said, clearing a place for herself on the small sofa. She liked the atmosphere of the study. There lived her creativity, 1,000 pieces of paper, in fine print, storing many stories, thoughts, and experiences. Lots of new names, addresses, booklets, from notes that were pasted here and there on the computer monitor, the system unit of the closet wall. Amadeus Publishing was considered one of the best in the region, and Evelyn, with her artistic taste for innate literacy, found her calling as editor. Emily herself, who graduated with a degree in landscape design, she dreamed of creating landscape masterpieces somewhere in the warm state, where there are no cold and snowstorms. Instead, she became a lonely, unemployed housewife, and a divorcee to boot. These thoughts put her in a bad mood. She picked up the scrolls, picked up the first manuscript she could find, and before she knew it, she was reading. Ow! Earth to Emily. She heard her friend's voice above her ear. She was standing there already dressed in her cloak. She jokingly called her favorite poncho and held her coat in her hands. The friend stepped out of the noisy publishing house and plunged into the thick October twilight. The first stars had already lit up in the sky. It was dark and clear, with no hint of rain. It smelled of white leaves and wet asphalt. The city lived its usual life, and it did not care about other people's problems. He was leisurely preparing for winter, shedding his last garments in Central Park and seeing flocks of migrating birds off into the distance. The lock clicked. Emily opened the door to her mother's apartment. The place smelled different now. There were boxes of clothes everywhere, exuding the smell of her favorite linens, perfume, shoes, and cosmetics. The latter, however, was very little, for the girl preferred natural beauty. In the kitchen, the refrigerator was sticking out, half filled with food, and in a vase. On the table in a picturesque still life were grapes. The girls ordered pizza, and when the payoff came, they gave champagne to your new life. Evelyn gave a short but pithy toast to the search for her father. Emily added thoughtfully. They clinked their glasses and bought the liquid out of themselves. By the way, what are you planning to do? Looking for a job. Evelyn put some grapes in her mouth. My father first. Just don't know where to start. I don't even have a visa. And I've overstayed my passport. Probably also need to figure out what kind of capital I have now. I think I should go to a pawn shop. Evelyn squinted at the pawn shop. Do you want to sell the trinkets your ex-husband gave you? Yeah, I don't have any other options right now. I've got a couple thousand cash in my wallet and an equal amount on my card. What am I gonna do with it? Spending a lot of utilities, groceries, travel. Again, not to mention the money for a new passport, visas, buying tickets. Emily bought a sip of champagne. But of course I can't help much with the money. But I will give you a price tip. Emily looked questioningly at her friend. She looked straight into her eyes. Rob called, which made Emily gasp for champagne in surprise. Are you out of your mind? What's the big deal? It's been so many years. Exactly. So many years you think he's still mad? Evelyn asked. Emily shrugged her shoulders. I'd be mad. I basically just left Rob. Emily and Rob had experienced what they call first love. It had been a delightful year. Their last class, the notes in their notebooks, the looks, the secret smiles, the long walks in the evenings. Their first kiss in the fall rain, when he walked her home after the fall ball. Exactly 13 years ago. And then there was graduation, the first adult sunrise of their very first time. All those images, like the frames of a movie, suddenly flashed before my eyes, a lump in my throat. They parted so incongruously. Emily went to Ulyanovsk State Institute in the Department of Design, and Rob went to the Moscow Academy of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Distance night calls, rare meetings on, no, eternal, and sometimes not read text messages. Next, the girls realized that it's all over. A year later, Rob's parents died in a car accident. His little sister was taken to the country by her grandmother, and his visits to his hometown ceased altogether. A new life began for both of them, and Emily got David, a handsome, intelligent man from a good family. And only Wendy is sad that her son-in-law is David and not Rob. One day they did see each other, and that meeting nearly took Emily out of her mind. It was the day of her wedding. There was a knock at the door. Then she heard her mother gasp in the hallway. Here was the wrap-up. In her wedding dress, she walked out of the room and was stunned. In front of her stood her first love with a huge bouquet of roses. They looked at each other. I have lived through these years of separation, regretting the lost time. Rob didn't say a word. He just handed her the flowers and left. Emily, powerless, she sank down on the floor in the hallway and closed her eyes. She had never felt such pain before. She wanted to throw off the dress and run after him, but she didn't. Emily, what is it? Evelyn's anxious voice rushed her out of her thoughts. Do you think he still remembers me? She looked hopefully at her friend, who put her hands on her shoulders and smiled. I'm sure he does. If you must know, he's not even married yet. Oh, Emily brushed it off. How do you know? I know. He and I call each other sometimes. Bet you didn't say anything either. Emily glared at her. Evelyn nonchalantly poured champagne. Well, what were you happy with your husband? You were going to have a house and children. Why would you want to be hurt? Of course she was right. But Emily felt something akin to a pang of jealousy. They'd kept in touch all these years. He'd asked the girl about me, overwhelmed by an emotion she couldn't hide, no matter how hard she tried. Evelyn shook her head negatively. You are a taboo subject, so he doesn't want to talk to me, much less help me. Her friend stroked her arm cheerfully. And somehow, I don't feel that way. Call him. She pulled out her phone, and the next second, a message with Rob's contact popped up on the display. Thank you. Emily leaned forward and hugged Evelyn in an impulse. By the time they said goodbye, it was nearly midnight. Good thing tomorrow was Saturday. Otherwise, the Branches would have had to peck their noses all day at work, already lying in bed. Emily twisted her phone thoughtfully in her hands. She was scared to death to dial, but the desire to hear his voice again was unbearable. His handsome face appeared before her. The last time they had met, his gray eyes had been filled with pain and with regret. His lips kissed her neck so frantically. Hers had once turned into a thin line of resentment and disappointment. Oh, how well she remembered that expression, a deep look that had left a huge scar in her heart. Finally exhausted, she fell into a deep, restless sleep. She dreamed about her mother, Rob's school, and the whole kaleidoscope of events and memories. She woke up the next morning with a terrible headache, blaming it on the champagne she had drunk the night before. The girl quickly ran to the shower and poured herself a cup of coffee, sat down at the table in the kitchen, putting the phone in front of her. For 10 minutes she hypnotized him with her gaze, then gathered her wits and quickly dialed the number. I wish he hadn't picked up the phone, she thought to herself. Hello, a hoarse voice that sent shivers down her body. Emily answered her with a loss of her hand, and she nearly dropped the phone. What to say? Hello, Rob, hanged a long pause, and Emily thought that now she would hear a short ringing. Apparently, he recognized her. Emily, it's you, me. She didn't know what else to say. I didn't expect to hear you. Rob's voice was calm. How's it going? Good, and how are yours? The girl struggled to regain her breath. Her heart was pounding like crazy. I've been better. Rob snorted and asked without hesitation. What do you mean? Emily didn't understand. In the sense that we hadn't spoken in 13 years. And then suddenly you call me. What do you mean by that? Stupidly, she repeated, and mentally I immediately scolded myself for it. Actually, a lot had happened. She wanted to tell him everything so badly that before her brain had time to react, she blurted out, "We can meet." She was immediately frightened of her own words. There was a short pause. Then came the answer. When and where? The coffee house, tomorrow 10:00 a.m. That would be fine. See you tomorrow. And Rob hung up. Emily stared at the phone as if it had grown ears. She did make an appointment. Yes, he said yes, didn't he? The tea went cold. Emily poured it down the sink and mechanically washed the cup and put it in the fridge. Did Evelyn bend the stars in delight when her friend told her about this morning's conversation with Rob? That evening they sat in the kitchen again, drinking instant coffee with steeped milk. An abomination, in Evelyn's opinion, but the day before Emily had bought a cappuccino and beat the wonderful milk foam with it. She sprinkled a little cinnamon on top and turned the ordinary black liquid into a delicious drink. Just like that. She smiled, embarrassed. Tomorrow's the meeting. Well done. Evelyn took a sip from the foam as well. A funny mustache was left on her upper lip. What are you going to wear? Emily shrugged. I haven't really thought about it, to be honest. Think about it. You have to look fabulous at least. And at most, she laughed. At most, you have to look like the woman he can't live without. The man sitting at the coffee shop table was so familiar to Emily that she could hardly suppress the lump forming in her throat. A slender figure, handsome, manly face, gray eyes, and dimples on his cheeks. When he smiled, he rolled onto the table and rubbed the menu pamphlet in his hands. Oh, those hands they had embraced and caressed her once. Emily realized what she wanted. Had it been all these years? No, sorely. She wondered to herself. dressed in retracted shields, jeans, a shirt, God, and the mossy Cossacks. She had felt confident a moment ago, but now all the confidence had evaporated somewhere. She plucked up courage, however, and headed for the table. Seeing her, Rob froze for a moment. Then he stood up to meet her. He hesitated awkwardly. "Hello," Emily smiled. "Thank you for coming." He, too, was wearing jeans and a shirt. Only unlike her, his shirt was austere, and so was his silvery look. They sat down across from each other. Silence hung over them. Emily knew he was waiting for her action, but she couldn't make up her mind. Rob looked at her as if she were the only one on earth. Well, she worked up the courage. "Are you waiting for an explanation?" He only shrugged his shoulders. "By the way, this is for you." He held it out to her. "Where did you get it?" "Sincerely surprised, girl. It's October." "Emily, you're funny, honestly." He even laughed, and in his voice she heard a long-forgotten, but familiar casual intonation. "In addition to October, it's also the 21st century." "Exactly," she muttered and smiled. "So what did you want to tell me?" Rob leaned back on the couch. "Why don't we order something first?" "Go ahead." Emily relaxed a little. She'd forgotten what it was like to be around him talking, to see him smile and squint his eyes. The waitress took her order for 2 lats and a couple of deep ones, and they were alone again. Rob looked into her face. "Well, tell me. I'm getting worried myself." Emily looked up and flinched as his hand rested on top of hers. She felt the heat wash over her whole body. It was either embarrassment from fear or a sudden buildup of excitement. "I was divorced the day before yesterday." She wanted to say something else, but she blurted it out. "But you probably already know." "I just knowed," he said. His hand still rested on her arm. "So there's no point in telling about the past, because you know about it. I'm thinking of the main thing, then. Do you remember what I told you about my father?" He nodded. "Well, none of that is true. He wasn't an engineer at all. As my mother said, he was a foreigner, or rather a German, whom my mother had met when she was young. They fell in love. She got pregnant with him for reasons unknown to me. He knows nothing about me and I about him. I found out about it myself a couple of days ago when I found my mother's letters that she wrote to him, but didn't send." Rob looked at her intently, listening, nodding, and Emily continued, "I only have the address and the name Alex Schwarzenberg." "That's not insignificant," Rob summarized. "Have you looked on social media?" "Nothing like that, or rather suitable. So you want me to run this information through service channels?" She nodded. Rob suddenly became sad. "So I was hoping for nothing, that you just wanted to see me." She flashed back. "Of course I wanted to, but I was embarrassed. I was scared to death that you were holding a grudge that you wouldn't forgive." He looked at her, and his eyes suddenly sparkled. "I forgave him long ago. As a matter of fact, I shouldn't have held a grudge. After all, our breakup was my own fault. But I was in such a mess. Everything was piled on top of school, losing my parents. Jenna was practically left in my arms. I mean, my grandmother was already sick. I hadn't considered the fact that you needed attention too. I thought you would wait as long as I needed. I had no right to think so." A traitorous tear slid down Emily's cheek, as if a huge boulder had fallen from his soul after his confession. "I waited. It's just that when you were completely gone, I thought you didn't need me anymore. So I decided to move on with my life. And when you came to my wedding day, I wanted to run after you, but I didn't because of David, because of my mother." He looked at her with all his eyes, just as he had 13 years ago. And that look was mesmerizing. They'd brought their order to distract them somehow. Emily drank a sip of the fragrant liquid. "Emily," Rob looked out the window at the gray sky with a smile. "You haven't changed at all. I haven't lost sight of you. Evelyn and I have called a lot over the years, and she's blabbed to me about everything about you, even though I didn't ask, and for that I am immensely grateful to her. We'll find your father for sure. It's just going to take time. I don't work for the authorities now. Why did the girl raise her eyebrows in surprise? You have dreamed about it almost since first grade, haven't you? I worked there, but not for long. My grandmother died. Jenna got cancer, and I had to quit my job to devote all my time to her. I had no one else besides my sister. Emily was stunned. She remembered very well. Rob's little sis. A ruddy little girl with blonde pigtails and silver, like her brother's eyes. Jenna has cancer. The girl repeated the word. It was as if she couldn't believe it. Rob nodded. A bone marrow transplant is required, but it costs a fabulous amount of money. I took out a loan for the maintenance therapy. But a job as a security guard in Europe still doesn't cover all the costs. But you don't have to worry about that, he warned Emily. Oh my God, Rob, I want to do something to help. He shook his head. I'm afraid there's nothing you can do. And I can see her. I can come and visit you. You want to come and visit? Reluctantly, Rob asked. Really, of course. Emily perked up. If you don't mind. He grinned and touched the edge of the glass with his finger. Frozen Jr. Actually, I don't mind. But Jenna won't be happy about it. Why not? Emily was surprised. But she thought it was clear. I'll find something to say. But then we can go right now. If you're not busy, of course. It's just that it's my day off, and I promised my sister a walk in the park. I'm free. Then let's go. He put the bill on the table and gave Emily a hand, taking her dressing room number. Rob walked confidently to the exit, and the girl, grabbing flowers and a bag, hurried after him, and one of them never touched me. When they got into the novelist's car, Emily asked him to stop by her house. There she pulled her favorite Italian handkerchief out of the closet and, putting it in a bag, left the apartment. Where are we going? Puzzled, the girl asked as they drove past the street where they used to live. Out of town, Rob answered, turning on his turn signal. When Jenna got sick, we sold my parents' apartment and bought a small house in the suburbs to be closer to nature. There's fresh air, a river, beauty there. He caught a glimpse of his companion. Have you changed your mind about going? No, of course not. Just asked Emily, something confused, and stared out the window. They drove almost all the way to the village in silence. Finally, Rob's Lacetti stopped outside a small house, boarded up in white and surrounded by a white wooden fence at night. Obviously, all its charms blew left here in the yellow grass of the forest, but studded with fallen leaves in the fire on the red rowan trees near the porch. Emily smelled as soon as he got out of the car near the fence to the track of the chassis on the master's bench, spread out in the trees. Carefully, with the hand of the departed September, Rob was working the wicket door, letting the guests in front and right onto the path in front of them. With a happy bark, a huge shaggy dog came out. Emily cried out in surprise, and the animal began to cash her hands frantically, wanting a package. Look at him, Rob grinned. He patted it on the withers. And you turned him to the girl. You wouldn't know. Emily squatted down beside the dog, his tail lolling. Sherlock, does he really have to be 14 now? Yes, she remembered the time they'd walked together, then just a silly puppy on the boardwalk in the park. He had changed a lot since then. One thing remained the same, however, his easygoing nature and cheerful disposition. Emily hugged that head and smiled at her, suddenly so nostalgic that it gave her a sweet tickle under her spoon. She and Rob stroked Sherlock and looked at each other. A woman's voice came from somewhere. The young men raised their heads to the porch at once, dressed in warm suits, scooter jerseys, a hat. Standing there was a very thin, pale girl with bruises under her eyes and a poker face indicating that she was very sick. Hello, Jenna. Emily. She got to her feet and smiled. Jenna stared at her for a good 10 seconds. Then she turned around and went inside. Don't mind her, Rob reassured her. I'll be right here for a minute. He walked quickly toward the house and disappeared behind the door. Emily felt unspeakably lonely. Sherlock poked her in the palms of her hands with his wet nose at first, then simply lay down at her feet. Obviously, he'd spent all his energy on meeting an old acquaintance and now he was just stretched out, snorting, breathing heavily. Right across the path. It got cold. A wind came out of nowhere, and Emily wished she had worn a hat and her leather jacket didn't have a hood. But then the door crept open and Rob came out. Seeing her folded up from the cold, he practically paddled her and dragged her into the house. "Are you cold at all?" I'm sorry, please. I just had to tell her there was a tit." He spread his palms, her forearms, and looked at her with such longing that Emily felt hot. Surprised at her own boldness, she suddenly wrapped her arms around his neck and stood on tiptoe and pressed her lips together. He immediately responded to the kiss, gently and tentatively at first, then assertively, passionately. Surely they would have stood there in the halls making up for lost time. But the door to the house was open, and a mocking voice said, "Come in already." Oh my goodness. A knock was heard and all was quiet. Obviously, Jenna realized what she had interrupted and hurriedly retreated. Emily struggled away from the group, hiding her face against his neck. She suddenly felt like laughing and jumping. He was standing there, his arms around her waist, breathing heavily. "What on earth are you doing?" He whispered into her hair. "Do you want me dead?" She only shook her head no. "Come on, let's go." Rob grinned, then Jenna. "That's enough. Punch." They walked into the small hallway. It smelled of fresh firewood and something delicious that reminded them of their childhood, of their grandmother. "We need to fire it up." The stove, Light said businesslike, coming out to meet them. "It's cold at home." Her cheeks were still flushed with embarrassment, and Emily blushed too. Now Rob took his guest's jacket and went to deal with the heating. "Hi." Sveta stared at Emily point-blankly. "Come on in." The girl nodded and went into the room where the owner of the house stacked firewood. "Still beautiful, already peacefully," murmured Light, following her. "Thank you. You're still just as pretty," Emily parried with a smile as she sat down on the fiddler and the couch. They both laughed, and the ice was broken. Pretty soon the room was filled with the sounds of happiness, their logs. Emily looked around the room where they were sitting. There were 2 more doors. Obviously, the bedroom furnishings were more than modest. Overnight, the thought of a measured, unpretentious life and a kind of peacefulness. With that of the modern things, the guest noticed a TV, a vacuum cleaner in the corner, and a cell phone standing on the charger. The whole atmosphere took her somewhere far away, and Rob misinterpreted her gaze. He explained, "Having sold the apartment, we bought this house because it was not expensive, and with the remaining money made the operation. Plus we had enough for a few more courses of chemo. That wasn't even in the kitchen yet." The Light snickered, raised a tablecloth on the table. "Let's eat already. My appetite's awakened today." "You're not allowed to stand at the stove." The older brother frowned. "Was setting something up in there." "I didn't scare you. I just put the chicken and potatoes in the oven. So don't be fooled by the foie gras tonight." She turned and disappeared into the doorway. Emily got up from the couch. "I'll go help her. I'm glad she hasn't lost her sense of humor." She looked at Rob with a smile, and meeting his appreciative gaze, went to get Jenna. They dined quietly, family style, talking softly and teasing each other. Remembering that she hadn't come empty-handed, Emily handed an Italian silk handkerchief from a branch. She thanked her warmly, and tearing a knitted cap from her head, went to the mirror to try it on. They watched in silence as the skinny fingers of the pro-crow tied an intricate knot on the top of her head, and behind the chair they returned to a very different one. Jenna feminine. Content. Even a blush appeared. Emily didn't notice how time flew by, and a sniffle began outside the window. The rain was intensifying. Rob stared at her tensely, as if he wanted to say something. It was getting late, and Emily met his gaze. "I need to go home. I'll take you," he said disappointedly. "Just the car to warm up." "Stay with us." Jenna grabbed her arm. "You don't have to go anywhere tomorrow." Rob froze halfway through. Emily was at a loss. On the one hand, she really wanted to stay. On the other hand, she was afraid to force the issue, They had only just met after all these years. "No, I can't tonight. Maybe some other time." And seeing the disappointed light on Jenna's face, she added, "Why don't you come to my place? I do have an even smaller dwelling, but between us girls there will be a bed for you." Realizing that persuasion was useless, Rob went out into the shadows, and Jenna grabbed Emily's hand. "Emily, don't leak him anymore. You hear?" The girl stopped and stared at her with her eyes wide open. "He still loves you, if you don't plan on being with him. Leave now and don't come back. He won't survive a second time." Emily realized, suddenly, that the moment of truth had arrived, when she had no right to lie, no right to be cowardly, no right to teach, no right to wiggle. The question was clear and implied a straightforward and honest answer. "I will never hurt him. I love him too. Just don't tell them that." For now, Jenna nodded. Her face relaxed, and she finally let Emily out on her arm. Rob was waiting for her in the car. When she emerged from the gate, he climbed out of the cabin and gallantly opened the door of his Lacetti to her. "Thank you," he muttered. Not being able to look him in the eye slammed the door. He returned to his seat. "Thank you for what?" The girl didn't understand for the branch. "I haven't seen her so happy and alive in a long time. It's just great. I'm very glad I was able to help in some way," Emily said sincerely. The rain licked the windshield, muttering the radio. They were driving on the slippery highway, and the atmosphere in the cabin seemed hot to the extreme. Suddenly, Rob slowed down and pulled over to the side of the road, turning off the ignition and putting the car on the handbrake. He moved closer to Emily and pulled her by the neck, beating his lips against hers. She surrendered to his power. Over her hands penetrated under his jacket and stopped where her heart was pounding frantically, her own heart thudding in her ribs. It felt like it was about to jump out of my chest. Finally, Rob pulled away from her, as if the years had never happened. "Barely breathing," he muttered. "I wish they weren't there," he muttered. She was at a loss for words in response. She just stared into his face and dissolved into it. It wasn't for nothing that they say first love is the strongest, most unforgettable. And in her case, apparently, also the only one. All the years of her life with David suddenly seemed to her like a farce, a production in which she was playing a role. The real her was here in this car with this man. They were looking at each other, moving closer again, about to touch her lips again. A phone call interrupted them from the sweet event. After 5 seconds of comprehending what was happening, Emily finally realized that the phone was beeping in her bag. When she picked up the phone, she heard the angry voice of Evelyn. "Mother, my woman. Who do you think you are? I haven't been able to reach you all day." "Evelyn, calm down. I'm fine." "Good for you," my friend said caustically. "I almost had a heart attack. You're not home. You do not pick up the phone. What should I do? Where are you?" "I'm with Rob." There was a short pause. "Well," Evelyn's voice softened noticeably. "Then you're simplified. Say hello and call me when you have time, but don't take too long." And she disconnected. Emily stared at Rob with a smile, shrugging. "I heard everything." He laughed and almost went deaf. What was she getting so worked up about? "Worried about me," Emily answered. "Let's go. Come on, let's go." Rob started the engine, and they drove leisurely down the wet highway. Near the door of her apartment, they kissed again. He declined the invitation to come in, for he didn't want to leave his sister alone for too long right in the driveway. Writing down Alex Schwarzenberg's details and his address, he said goodbye to Emily and left. Once home, Emily ran to the shower, jumped into bed, and dialed Evelyn's number and told her about the events of the day. She listened attentively, occasionally inserting phrases like, "Wow," and "I'm shocked." They chatted for about an hour until Rob texted me, "Thank you for the day." Emily smiled to herself and, closing her eyes, instantly fell asleep. It was quiet in the pawn shop, except for the cognacs of a huge antique clock standing as decoration near the counter under glass. The display case was full of things and rings to cameras and video recorders brought in by people in need of money. Emily felt extremely uncomfortable and insecure in her bag was everything she got from David. After the divorce, she and Evelyn were supposed to meet back at her house since she was afraid to walk down the street alone with such valuable things. But her friend was held up at work. She was too embarrassed to call Rob. Behind the counter, she was met by a dry-looking man wearing thick-lensed glasses. She looked like a leprechaun and laid out in front of him everything she had brought, namely, a pair of gold earrings with diamonds, a platinum ring with a scattering of tiny emeralds, a gold watch, and finally, an engagement ring. It wasn't worth much, of course, but Emily didn't want to leave it behind. Suddenly, the front door slammed, and she was relieved to see a panting Evelyn High. She literally rolled into the pawn shop. In a hurry, folding umbrellas like a blotting dog. "What a weather." "Hi," waved Emily to her. "You're just in time." The little man behind the counter cowered at the door. Apparently, he thought someone else might come in. Evelyn guessed his thoughts and leaned on the counter in a familiar manner. In a mock low voice, she said, "No, that's all. That's all we're waiting for." "Well, that's fine. Leprechaun, here we go." Half an hour later, the girls emerged into the pouring rain, satisfied and pleasantly surprised. The money they got for the jewels should be enough to cover their first time out of work, to find their father, and to go to Germany. "So much for my unsuccessful family life," Emily joked, clutching her purse with the money. The cab Evelyn had ordered stopped near them, and the friends hurried to it. As they drove to Emily's apartment, Rob called. She heard his low voice in the receiver. "Hi." The girl didn't notice how her face blurred into a smile. "Baby," she rolled her eyes and turned away to the window. "Emily, there's news about your father so quickly." She was surprised. Yes, there was silence on the phone, and Emily's insides went cold. "He's dead." "No. What are you saying?" "He's alive." Emily's tears suddenly flowed. Her hands were shaking, so she was afraid to drop the phone. "Can you come and tell me everything?" "Yeah, just a couple of hours to get the medicine off the branch." "Okay, thank you." Evelyn, anxious, looked at her friend. "So, what's going to happen there?" "He's alive." Emily laughed through her sobs. "My father is alive." Her friend looked at her and tears suddenly flowed from her eyes too. Continuing to cry, the girls embraced. The cab driver looked in the rearview mirror at a loss, pondering whether to tell them they were both drinking or not to get involved in this confusing matter. The girls were sitting in the kitchen with a bottle of valerian on the table in front of them. The time dragged on endlessly, so when the beep of the long bell sounded, they both snapped out of their seats. "Evelyn, hello," smiled Rob, when they opened the door for him. "What's up?" He froze, looking at the excited faces of the girls. "Come in," Evelyn commanded quickly. "Don't, Tommy. We're dying of impatience." The young man squeezed into the cramped hallway, which seemed to have shrunk in size, and began to take off his shoes. Once he had already accepted, Evelyn pushed him into the kitchen and sat him down at the table. Seeing the valerian, Rob grinned. "I think I missed it." Both girls looked at him with such a look that he hurriedly opened the folder he had in his hand and pulled out several pieces of paper and the fine print, handing them to Emily. He said, "Here you go, princess. You are in for a big surprise." Emily carefully took the documents and sat down in a chair. Her strength suddenly left her. Her head felt dizzy. "Don't worry, that's what you whispered to Evelyn. Read it to me." She began to read. Extract from the Register of Noble Families of Germany. Alex Manfred von Schwarzenberg, 12th generation. Date of birth, June 12, 1961. Place of birth, Germany. Rhineland-Palatinate. City of Trier. Parents, Hans Friedrich von Schwarzenberg and Birgit Elisabeth von Schwarzenberg, née Kaiser. Higher education in the humanities. Specialties in history, international relations. What followed were many dates of events and documents that told a brief history of Duke von Schwarzenberg's life. Emily stopped reading. She was confused and bewildered. Her father was a duke, and in the 12th generation too. Unbelievable. Oh, Mother, how could you keep all this from me? She thought bitterly. My mother is a woman. Evelyn broke the silence in the kitchen. Before you now, we must call your ladyship. No more, no less. She laughed. Vid, stop it. I can't believe it. It's all true. She turned to the other side. He nodded affirmatively. There isn't a picture, she asked hopefully. Alas, no. That's all I could find. Oh my God, said Emily. I thank you so much. You're welcome. He answered and somehow became sad. He watched her absorbed with the news of her origins. Suddenly, he thought there was no place for him in her life again. But pronounced Rob, slapping himself generationally and rising from his stools. If you don't need me anymore, I'll go. Emily frightenedly grabbed his arm. Evelyn tactfully walked out of the kitchen. Wait, don't go, please, Emily. He looked directly into her eyes. I'm not stupid. I know you're going away to look for your father now. And that is the right thing to do. But you won't come back here, leave me again. I don't want to die of longing for you again. Let me go now, please. She looked at him without taking her eyes off him. I can't lose you again like last time. And if you leave now, I'll follow you, and I don't care how it looks. You need to think. You have another interesting destiny ahead of you. There is nothing in my life except the work of hospital wards of debts for treatment off the branch. He held her hands and silver in his eyes, the sadness of the world. But I want to be in your life too. Yes, I will find my father, but he may not want to see me either. Who knows? And even if he does, it won't change anything. I can't let you go. At that moment, they heard the front door slam. It was Evelyn who went home, leaving the two of them alone. Rob stood across from Emily, hesitant to believe what she had just said. She was looking at him so openly and sincerely. Her lips flushed her cheeks. Reflections don't tempt me. Emily, don't tempt me. Rom, I've been begging you for minutes now in a feigned angry way, she said. After all, I must keep my dignity. He smiled and brought his face close to hers. She immediately guided her hands and his neck lightly. He pressed his forehead against hers. You understand that I still can't breathe evenly when you're around. I could say the same, she whispered back. The hell with you, developing it again. What didn't the girl understand? Yes, my heart, he laughed nervously. I can't give up the joy now, to hold you in my arms, to kiss you until you make me, like our first time at the prom. Remember, she nodded. Pulling away for a moment, he picked her up on his arm, carried her into the room, and laid her gently on the couch. Time stood still, as if there had been no 13 years of separation, no resentments, no misunderstandings. There were only two men and women in love, longing for each other, so that the world around them ceased to exist. This evening belonged only to them. And then what would happen? It took a month and a half to apply for a new passport and a Schengen visa. During this time, Emily and Rob became close and practically never parted. Emily often went to the farm. She went for walks with Jenna, and the weather was fine. At the end of November, the days were clear and frosty. Finally, a one-way ticket to Philadelphia, Frankfurt, was bought, and Emily got busy packing her bags. As her departure drew nearer, Rob became withdrawn and moody, and did not answer his phone for long periods of time, disappearing into thin air. Then one day he showed up at Emily's house drunk. She had never seen him like that. Without saying a word and putting him to bed on the sofa, she sat there for a long time, gazing into his familiar face. In the back of her mind, she understood the reason for his behavior, but there was nothing she could do to change this trip. She waited with excitement and impatience, and he must have understood those feelings. After all, this was her father we were talking about. Rob woke up the next morning and apologized at length, and left without even kissing her goodbye. The flight was scheduled for December 23, and Rob volunteered to drive her to Philadelphia in his car. Emily didn't mind, for she wanted to spend more time with him, to talk to him, to reassure him that she would return once she'd met her father and gotten to know him better. The tension between them in the last few days had become unbearable. Rob was sullenly silent, and on the eve of departure, he simply grabbed her out of the group in the elevator and squeezed her with such force that she almost cracked her ribs. That night they made love frantically and passionately, as the last time, and in the morning he was aloof and alien again. Emily was very upset about that. She was also worried about how the envelope with the money she had left from the branch the day before would react. It wasn't much, but it would have been enough to cover a month's worth of medicine. When they said goodbye to her, Emily had made the girl swear not to say anything to Rob before she left. "Jenna, you know I'll be back." She looked seriously into the face of her man's sister. "I won't leave you." That nodded and sobbed. Tightly she hugged Emily goodbye. The drive to Philadelphia took them 2 hours. In all that time, they'd barely exchanged a dozen phrases with each other. Rob stared intensely at the road, clutching Emily's palm in his hand. Words were unnecessary. Both understood that. They arrived in Philadelphia at 3:00 a.m. The flight was scheduled to leave at 6. The airport was crowded, as usual. Emily and Rob trudged through the crowd to the check-in counter with their suitcases, and they had only a few minutes to say goodbye. Rob looked longingly at Emily. "Emily, you're slipping away again," he said sadly. "I'll be back, I promise." She gusted, wrapped her arms around him, stood on tiptoe, and pressed her lips to his. Their breaths mingled. The flight was announced, and Emily, struggling to pull away from him, wiped away her tears, headed out to meet her past. On the plane, she calmed down a bit and tuned into the flight. The flight to Frankfurt was 8 hours long, and she had time to think about her actions. The thought that she might not be welcome in her father's house made her shiver again. He did not know, after all, that his sweetheart had been pregnant, much less that he now had a grown daughter. Perhaps he was happily married and had other children, and it may well be that she has brothers and sisters. The turbines rumbled. The plane rushed forward. She lifted off and hurtled off into the distance, hurtling toward the unknown. She thought. The airport of Frankfurt, the largest in Europe, was like an anthill. Countless terminals, floors, and check-in desks. Everything around was set up for Christmas. There were even photo areas with Santa Claus in each waiting room. Emily thought of Rob, who is on his way back home right now. Pulling out her phone, she tried to catch Wi-Fi to drop a message to him on the circuit. Plugging it in, she typed in a short text. "I've made the flight. Missing you already." Immediately a reply from Rob came in, and so did I. The answer seemed dry and one-worded to her. Immediately the mood soured. However, the girl nevertheless pulled herself together and went to get her luggage, while remembering to skim the message on the turn. From the airport, she took a cab to the train station, where she caught a train. She had several destination connections ahead of her, and she struggled hard to sleep. After all, she had spent the previous night on the road. In addition, she was exhausted by the flight-related travel. Excitement. Sitting down by the window, she watched the very unfamiliar scenery flashed by outside the window. Rocky hills of cavernous tunnels, and covered with thick growths of forest, windmills valleys with a scattering of tiny river girls with swimming ducks and swans, industrial area with huge warehouses and hangars, ruins of ancient castles on top of mountains, old Catholic churches with sad roofs. Emily always loved the unique comfort of old Europe with its cuddly bears, lush greenery, and good-natured natives. There was order everywhere. It seemed as if the inhabitants had made special preparations for the arrival of some important guest. The carriage Emily rode in was crowded. Mostly it was young people in jeans, liberal jackets, and Christmas hats, but also people from the East, from Asia, and God knows what other sides of the world. After 2 transfers, the girl finally boarded the train to Trier. It was a pity she hadn't taken care of the hotel, for she was literally knocked off her feet. She should have showered and fallen on any surface that resembled a bed. Besides, she was unbearably hot in her coat and warm boots, which seemed too light. Snow covered Philadelphia, finally, After a long flight and 3 train transfers, Emily stood in the center of the hall of Trier Station with 2 suitcases and a confused face. People were scurrying around, shrugging her shoulders, hurriedly apologizing, smiling, waving Christmas greetings. It was quite clear to her that she needed somewhere to sleep and gather her thoughts today. Before going to the cherished address, on top of that, she was starving because the last time she'd eaten was on a plane. A decent number of hours had passed since then. She stepped out of the station building into the city twilight, breathed in the cool winter air, and thought about the fact that somewhere in that city, 1,000 kilometers away from her home, lived her only family man. She had her mother's letters in her bag and a sapphire ring in case he didn't believe her. Thinking she needed somewhere to stay, she asked a pretty woman at the bus stop where the nearest hotel was. 20 minutes later, she was at the front desk of a small hotel on Baldwinstrasse, not far from the train station. After taking the keys and the porter, she asked if she could order his room for dinner. And upon receiving an affirmative answer, she headed for the elevator. On the 3rd floor, a tired, hungry Emily looked for her room and literally fell into it, dragging her suitcases behind her, dropping her coat and shoes. She collapsed onto a large steel bed behind a lilac bedspread. For a good 5 minutes, she took a breath and calmed her train of thought, a worry in her head. The room was quite modest, but clean, tidy, decked out in lilac tones, furnished with modern, ivory-colored furniture. It reminded Emily of Provence, where she had been with her ex-husband. The girl quickly took a shower, in which she was happy to find soft slippers, fluffy terry cloth robe and clothes. In them, she ran to open the door. They'd brought dinner quickly with French fries, fried mushrooms with chicken, and she picked up a cup of tea and walked out onto the balcony, hidden behind the curtains, straight into her robe. In front of her stretched a bare alley, dedicated to leaning over it flamboyantly, not with the heads of lanterns. Trier. It wasn't a big city, but the streets were very crowded. Christmas lights sparkled and streamed everywhere. Bells were ringing. Music was playing. Emily thought also that it was a fairy tale time. It was the right atmosphere to symbolize the beginning of something new and good in her life. She went back to her room and got into bed. Retrieving her mother's letters from her bag, she reread them again and pressed them to her face. It seemed to her that they still held the warmth and scent of someone who would never write anything to anyone again. Her eyes began to slip, and with an unbelievable effort, she pressed the light button. Emily drifted off to sleep. When she opened her eyes again, the sun was already high. It gathered through on the curtains and left a light streak on the parquet floor. Emily hung her feet off the bed and barefoot, walked like a window. Pushing that back against the wall, she let more light into the room and closed the balcony door. A frosty draught immediately burst into the room, chasing away the remnants of sleep on her face and replacing them with a blush. Her feet immediately froze, and the girl hurriedly put on her slippers. Today is Catholic Christmas Eve, thought Emily. How symbolic. She took a shower, then dressed long and carefully, choosing an outfit, folding her hair dryer, knotty curls, and doing her makeup. Then, putting back in her bag of letters, she forgot herself and walked out of the room into the hallway. Not far from the elevator hung a large mirror, and the girl looked at her reflection with approval. She was wearing beige slacks, bananas, a purse, a new sweater to match, patent brown with large buckles, and an Italian shawl with ornaments and tassels. And only her hair brought some resonance to this elegant bow. The dark curls didn't want to lie down in any way, neatly thinking it was even more natural that way. Emily went downstairs near the front desk, and she spotted a rack of travel guides and bought one. There was a tourist map enclosed in it, and when she opened it, the girl realized that she couldn't find a better one. It showed all the streets, alleys, and buildings in the city with detailed names and numbers. When she arrived at the hotel restaurant, she ordered herself a cup of cappuccino. She didn't feel like eating, for everything inside trembled with excitement. She thought of Rob. He must be at work by now, or rushing off with his entourage for another treatment. She decided not to write him yet, so she studied the map. It turned out it was only a half-hour walk to the right house. The waiter brought coffee, but Emily couldn't take a sip. So much was her excitement. She got up from the table and stepped outside in relief. She was greeted by a beautiful, cool European morning. In all its festive splendor, she looked at the map. Apparently, she needed to first pass a mysterious place called Porto. Not to go a couple of blocks to cross the footbridge over the Moselle River. According to the map, it was a short walk to Luxembourg, which is no surprise here in Europe. All little Emily smiled at her thoughts. After walking a couple of streets, she found herself in front of an imposing masonry structure that resembled the burnt-out fortress of Porto. Not a game confirmed her hunch. The guidebooks did. Behind her stretched a huge shopping plaza with many stores and restaurants. At other times, Emily would have strolled through it, but not today. After passing a few more streets and a couple of shopping malls, she emerged onto a picturesque embankment, connected to the opposite bank by an ancient wide bridge. There were hills on the other side of the river, studded with villas and mansions, one of which her father lived in. Below the bridge was a large pier where boats and yachts were moored. The river flowed leisurely, as if in a dream. Near the edge of the shoreline, there was a bit of ice. Emily walked along the bridge at the same pace, for her heart was pounding. She felt as if she were about to lose her senses. At last, she was on the opposite bank of the river, and the cozy villas with high fences, behind which the skulls and roofs of the houses were barely visible, stretched out picturesquely before her. Emily had no trouble finding the right address. It was easy enough, for the Schwarzenegger residence was one of the most primitive in this little German Beverly Hills. In front of it was a massive framed stone fence, killed behind the ivy, with an equally bulky cast-iron gate flaunting itself in the middle. Behind them came back, Flying with You, and the park, slightly silvered by the morning frost. The climate in these parts was rather mild, and Emily noticed that some of the trees in town were already having buds. The old roofed house was beautiful, built in the late Baroque style. Even at this time of year, surrounded by a garden and ivy-filled flowers, it looked romantic and picturesque. She stood beside the gate and hesitated to ring the bell. This was where her father lived, her ancestors. This was probably where the lifelong love story that had brought her into the world began. A strange feeling gripped Emily. She wanted to cry and laugh at the same time. Fear of the unknown turned every nerve into taut strings. She noticed how she paved the gravel, the paths. A man showed up. He looked to be about 50-50. He was quite built with blonde hair. He had a dog with him, a little Yorkshire Terrier. Some kind of a hunch. Her sixth sense told her it wasn't just a servant walking a dog. He was wearing light-colored pants, a knit sweater, the color of white wool, and a striped scarf. He reminded the girl of Harry Potter, for on his nose sat glasses with round lenses. Emily felt her pulse clear, at least in half. She realized that it was most likely her father, Alex Schwarzenberg. The girl stood at the gate, unable to move, but he, meanwhile, noticed her and headed straight for the gate. The doggy took over beside him. He walked with confident, vigorous steps, not taking his eyes off his guest. Stopping just a meter away from her, he froze. His face, still young and beautiful, expressed a whole range of feelings of confusion, surprise, disbelief, and even fear. At that moment, Emily finally realized that her father was standing in front of her. It was as if she were looking in a mirror. He had the same facial features, the same straight nose, cheekbones, eye shape, even the shape of his lips. Only Alex Schwarzenberg was blonde, blue-eyed, and Emily inherited her dark hair and chocolate-colored eyes from her mother. "I can help you with something." "Unsure?" the man asked, keeping his eyes on her face as he prayed that his voice wouldn't tremble. Emily did ask, "Just in case, I would like to see Mr. von Schwarzenberg. I have something to tell him." The man opened the gate and came out to meet her. "Alex von Schwarzenberg, let me introduce myself," and held out his hand to her. The girl carefully put her fingers in his palm. I beg your pardon, but who are you? He looked at her expectantly. I come from the USA. Emily said these words and noticed the change in his face. My name is Emily. He instantly went pale. Evidently, he remembered the name well, which had been her mother's and Emily's own name before her marriage. Please come in. He shunned and led her through the gate. They walked in silence all the way home. The dog ran beside her, oblivious to the guest, which is evidently what it is. The most aristocratic upbringing, when even dogs behave decently in the presence of strangers. They were met at the front door of the house by the Major, whom Alex ordered to organize a tea party and summon the Dowager Duchess Birgit. So she has a grandmother as well. At last they were in the hall. The splendor of the surroundings was blinding. Emily felt as if she were in one of the German museums, a country she had seen quite a few in her travels in the past. Antique chandeliers, tapestries, vintage furniture of expensive sorts, wood and silence. Deafening enough that Emily could hear her own heart pounding. Come, let's go into my office, invited Alex. They went into a richly furnished room, more like a library. For cabinets with books stood all around the room. Emily noticed that many of them had no names on the mugs, so they were very old. He gestured to the guest chair by the desk and sat across from her. So, are you related to Wendy? He said quietly, just like that, right in the forehead. Emily knew there was no turning back, so she nodded affirmatively. She's at peace here too. Was there such hope in his voice that she felt a bitter lump in her throat? Alas, she is not here. She died 2 years ago. Emily saw how his face twitched and whether his eyes were moist. And she was also my mother. So she said that. Alex stared at her with his eyes wide open. His hands, neatly folded on the table, nodded visibly. They were both silent. Emily saw tears run down his cheeks. The man was crying for her mother, for their faults, for their lives together, for their past, which quite obviously still remained in his memory, and she was grateful to him for that. He loved her. He waited for her. The girl suddenly realized that she was crying too. So they sat against each other, so similar in blood, but complete strangers. Emily didn't know how much time passed before he asked his question, "How old are you, Emily?" "I turned 30 on August 1. These words Emily whispered, for his voice overflowed with emotion, sat down to the limit. He had no trouble counting in his mind the thoughts, the experiences, the conclusions, the pain. It was all reflected on his face. He covered it with his hands, and the girl heard suppressed sobs. His shoulders implied, as they do for children who cannot calm down. Emily froze. She was suddenly scared. What was going to happen next? A knock on the office door brought him to his senses. He took up his chair and, wiping his cheeks with his palms, said loudly, "Come in." Gerd Schwarzenberg breakfast is already served in the dining room. Frau Birgit has also come down. She is waiting for you. Thank you, Peter. Tell him we'll be there in 10 minutes. Nodding, the servant bowed courteously and disappeared into the doorway. Alex looked at his guest. "So, Emily, are you my daughter?" Emily only lowered her eyes. She had heard the German restraint and was not expecting a warm embrace. However, Alex rose from his seat and walked around the huge solid oak desk and approached Emily. The girl rose towards him, and he, taking her in his hands, drew her to him and enclosed her in his arms, who found herself at his chest, where her heart was beating frantically. Emily suddenly felt at home. It was as if she was a little girl again, who dreamed of saying the word daddy for once, and now she was not alone. The girl was happy. What a pity Rod wasn't here. Then her happiness would have been complete. She hugged him, too, her father, who had not known about her for years. Why did her mother do that? Emily would never know that again. Finally, he pulled her away from his chest and looked her in the face. "Of course, you look like me, girl. It's like looking in a mirror. My God, it's happiness. It's just unbelievable. I looked for Wendy for so many years, but I didn't know where she had moved from Philadelphia, where we first saw each other. I loved her more than life, but she left me. And 30 years later, you show up this miracle." He laughed through his tears, never letting go of his daughter's hand. "I have to give you something." Reluctantly, Emily spoke. After he managed to cope with our emotions, he looked at her questioningly, and she pulled out of her bag letters and a ring. When he saw the ring, Alex covered his mouth with his palm, as if he was afraid he was going to scream. He seemed about to lose his senses. "I gave this ring to my Wendy the last day we met. I asked her to marry me, and she said yes. But then she suddenly disappeared." He touched it with his hand, stroked the faceted stone, and it was as if he were carrying his thoughts back in time. She kept it. Then his gaze fell on the letters, and recognizing the handwriting, he began to read feverishly. After all 3 letters were read, Alex looked at Emily again. Tears were flowing down his face again. I had lost the love of my life. I had almost come to terms with it, had learned to live without her. But fate had given me a special gift. He smiled now. "She gave me you. A daughter, my flesh and blood, born by the one who stole my heart forever. I found out by accident when I was going through my mother's things. I thought my father was dead. You must have been very lonely when she left." He looked at her with concern and compassion. "Yes, very much. And I was so anxious to find you, just to meet you, to talk to you. I don't need anything." He put his finger to his lips, and she froze half-heartedly. "Now we're going to go, and you're going to meet your grandmother, and then we're going to come back here, and we're going to talk for a long, long time. You will tell me all about your life, about yourself, about your mother." Emily nodded. By the time they were in the dining room, the girl had calmed down a little. Even though everything that was happening seemed to her like a fairy tale, a tricked-out consciousness of a magical dream, she understood that her life had changed forever. Her father believed her immediately and did not send her away unconditionally. She was not questioned in any way. The dining room of Princess von Schwarzenberg's residence was decked out in calm tones, bed-toned, light tapestries, and lightly antique furniture in the late Rococo style. Particularly impressed Emily, the lover, vintage and antique, gorgeous sideboard in white oak, golden case, and with other glassware in the sideboard. The finest Emily had ever seen. At the head of the enormous table, shot with the finest white tablecloth on which breakfast was set. Sitting there was an old woman with perfectly white hair, folded in a cochlea at the back of her head, an oval face with thin lips, and a small, straight nose on which round glasses sat. She looked unhappy. "Good morning. Sorry to keep you waiting, Mom." Alex greeted his mother politely. "But I had more than good reason." And he, putting his hand on Emily's back gently, pushed her toward the table. Birgit replied nonchalantly with a sip of tea. She didn't think another tearful interview with a young journalist was more important than having breakfast with her mother on Christmas Eve. It was as if he let her words slip past his ears. "Allow me to introduce Emily Zakharov's mother. She just flew in yesterday from Philadelphia." At these words, the woman's face stretched and stiffened. Her hand with her cup of tea dropped noisily onto the table. Why did the enormous liquid spill and left stains on the white tablecloth? She takes a few seconds to comprehend what is happening. Then she asked the now familiar Emily question, "How old are you, girl?" She looked so arrogant that Emily slowly began to guess why her mother ran away from her happiness as well. "I am 30 years old," the old lady frantically fished for air. "So this is your daughter," she said, looking at her son. "It's not hard to guess, given that you have the same face. I knew this moment would come sooner or later." Alex looked stunned, first at Emily, then at his mother. "You knew?" She was silent, and he repeated the question. "Did you know Wendy was pregnant?" The old woman was drinking her tea again. Her chin treacherously trembled. She stared out the window, where the December sun poured gold on the paths of the park. "I knew," she answered, sobbing. Alex moved closer to the table and sat down next to her. Emily cautiously crouched in the chair at the very end. "You knew I was going to be a father, and you didn't say anything," he whispered. For a moment, Emily thought he was going to hit her, the look in his eyes so frightening. All these years of pining for Wendy, suffering in the company of an unloved wife, tormented by the fact that I have no heirs. "You knew I had a child." Birgit was silent, not looking at him. Her eyes glittered. "What did you do?" Her son grabbed her wrists. "What did you do?" "All I did was for you, for the family," she blurted out. "What did you say to Wendy? Did you make her leave me? Answer me." Then the old woman burst into tears. Yes, it was my fault that she left. I threatened her that I would never accept her into my family, that you would sooner or later realize what a mistake you had made, that society would never accept her or her child. I told her she wouldn't get a penny of our fortune. And then I offered her money to go away, but she wouldn't take it. God, how could you? Dumbfounded, looked at her Alex. "It's my blood, Schwarzenberg's blood after all." He nodded at Emily. "I was looking for them." Birgit blurted out, "I've been looking for years. When you divorced, I hired a private detective to find both Wendy and the baby. If he was born, I saw your anguish and regretted my action. But they weren't in Philadelphia. The string was cut in some provincial town where she was last seen. I wanted to make it right." She cried, waving her eyes with a handkerchief at Emily, who had lost her maternal grandmother. "Even as a child, I felt sorry for her." Alex sat with his head down on his arm. Emily became uncomfortable, for they were talking as if she were not here. She suddenly thought of the house, of the novel A. She suddenly, deeply. She sighed, which attracted the attention of both her father and Emily's grandmother. Alex muttered, "You can't even imagine. I'm so sorry. You have grown away from your family, from me and our roots and our history. We have so much catching up to do. I had a mother. Sadly," she said, "and she always loved and supported me, so I wasn't alone." He moved toward her and took her hands in his. "Now no one will ever keep us apart." He glanced meaningfully at her mother, who was sobbing silently over her cup of tea. "You will live here in your own home, which belongs to you by right. If you don't want it, you can choose any house you like, and we'll buy it." He looked at her with such enthusiasm and hope that Emily dared not object. "I really want to get to know you better. My daughter is my child." He brought his lips to her hands. The girl noticed that the old woman was furtively looking at them and smiling through her tears. Emily spent the whole day in the company of her father, who did not want to part with her for a moment. Her belongings were brought from the hotel and laid out by the maid in one of the magnificent Victorian bedrooms, which were found on the 3rd floor. She and Alex had a long conversation in the living room, telling each other about their lives, and he eagerly caught every word concerning Wendy. When Emily told him that she had never had another man, he cried. From time to time, Birgit joined them, but her son did not really welcome her appearance, and she withdrew under some pretext. In the evening, they went for a walk around the world, and the father showed Emily the famous Basilica of Constantine and the grandiose street Peter's Cathedral, where festive services were being held. On the way, they repeatedly came across performers who smiled affably at all passers-by, and the girl even got into the spirit of a real Catholic Christmas. Once in the cathedral, Emily could not contain her admiration. A huge vaulted room with magnificent decoration of 1,000 candles, organ music, sarcophagi with relics of saints. Right in the stone floor were carved the names of bishops and cardinals, buried here under slabs, polished young 1 million human feet. For several centuries, the cathedral had been full of people, and he and his father, unable to find a single vacant pew, stepped out again into the cold December air. Near the basilica, at a cozy outdoor cafe, Emily and Alex responded with a huge mulled wine and raw mozzarella balls and Christian cornflakes. Then we headed to the waterfront and took a long wander down the Moselle River to a pedestrian bridge into a respectable neighborhood of wealthy villas and mansions. "I got the best present this Christmas," with a smile said Alex, when they arrived at the gate of the princely residence. "I wish my happiness could never be complete without your mother. You must accept it and move on with your life, as I did." Emily shook his hand. He only nodded sadly, and they headed toward the house. In the dining room, as in the morning, Birgit was waiting for them. When they entered, she sat at the head of the table, stretched out like a string, and grudgingly pressed her already thin lips. Emily suddenly realized that she wasn't mad at her. She looked so guiltily unhappy that the girl, on a sudden impulse, went over to her and hugged her. Birgit jumped up in her chair in surprise and was taken aback. She looked at her son, who was as surprised as she was, and froze halfway to the table set for the festive dinner, expecting his left-handed mother to give an angry tirade about inappropriate behavior. The old woman gently dismissed her granddaughter and did not shed a tear. "Businesslike," she said, "since you were late for Christmas Eve, you don't have to change." Hearing these words, Duke Alex von Schwarzenberg laughed in relief. Christmas morning was overcast and rainy. Summer woke up on a giant bed in her now bedroom covered by the covers of the common house, and first of all I dialed Rob's number. Weird. After a few long beeps, short ones were heard. Obviously, he had dropped the call. Emily missed him so desperately that she wasn't even happy to be reunited with her father. She felt lost and alone. Several times during the day, Emily called him, and history repeated itself. Evelyn listened to her story without breathing and promised to find out what had happened to Rob on December 31. A dinner party was scheduled, where Duke von Schwarzenberg planned to present his unexpected daughter to high society. On this occasion, tailors, stylists, reporters from local newspapers, and even one journalist from Berlin visited the house on the highway all day. Emily was deathly tired of such close attention to his person and evening. After dinner, they spent the evening alone with her father in the far drawing room, where the fireplace was blazing hot. This time she shared with him her dreams of professional fulfillment, which he accepted enthusiastically, suggesting that she set up her own business here in Germany. He spoke so enthusiastically about it, listened so attentively to her, that the girl felt ashamed that his plans were not destined to come true. After the new year, she would fly home to the USA, where there was a man for whose sake she would give up even the prospect of living here near her family. Maybe she'll tell Alex. Maybe he'll even understand her, because he, too, had a great love in his life. She holds nothing back. She told her father the long story of their relationship, reinforced by stories of his responsibility to his sick sister and how Emily's meeting with her father was due only to his efforts and connections. Alex listened with the utmost interest. "So this young man is very important in your life." He tilted his head to the side with a smile and looked adoringly at his daughter. Emily nodded, "And he must be very resentful of me." Why did the girl tell her father from the branch about the money she had left before she left? "Oh, women," Alex said with a slight reproach. "How reckless you are in your good deeds. Of course he resents you, my dear." "And what am I to do?" Her voice trembled treacherously. "Run to him, of course. What about you? What about the reception?" He laughed. "But we'll have the reception on the morning of January 1. I'll arrange everything to Philadelphia. Just promise to come back to me." "I promise." "Daddy." Emily was so grateful to him that she didn't hold back and snuggled into her father's chest. He gently stroked her hair and added, "I will call a good friend of mine in Berlin. He is a professor of luminary medicine. We will try to help your lover's sister." "Thank you very much." "Thank you," hotly thanked the girl. A few minutes later, she was already climbing the stairs to her room with the intention of calling Evelyn right away. The uncertainty was killing Emily. She hadn't heard her voice in 2 days, having checked in her bedroom. She immediately dialed her friend's number. "Hello," she heard a hoarse voice. "Evelyn, Emily, are you there?" "I'm a little confused, Emily. What's wrong with your voice?" It turned out that Evelyn had come down with a fever, never having had a chance to see Rob. Evelyn's calls are also being dropped by him. Wishing her friend a speedy recovery and disconnected, Emily dialed Jenna's number. The caller is out of range of the network, said nasty voice on the phone, that the only thing left to do is to bombard social media. What on earth was going on? Suddenly something was wrong. Emily was filled with wonderment. The 3 days before the appointment flew by quickly. To get to know her many uncles and children, to get to know her father and grandmother better, and to realize that her life would never be the same again. On the day of her appointment, Emily woke up with a terrible headache. She dreamt of Rob reaching out to her, sick Evelyn and Jenna in a jersey and hat in a hospital bed. On top of that, the phone was still silent. All her calls went unanswered, dangling her bare feet off the bed. Emily dialed Rob's number again. Silence again. She couldn't stand it any longer. No sooner had the girl put the phone away than the bell rang. It was Evelyn. "Hello." Emily answered in a husky voice. "Something has happened. Rob has been in an accident. I don't know anything myself, because I'm still lying in bed." Emily wouldn't listen to her. 15 minutes later, she was standing in the living room of her new house, suitcase in hand, explaining herself to her father. The house was already ready for her. Additional hired servants scurried back and forth with a tray and candelabra-type tablecloth and porter. The smells from the kitchen were terrific. She was so nervous her hands were shaking. Alex sat her down in a chair, poured her a glass of wine, and picked up her phone. About 20 minutes later, she had tickets booked for a direct flight Frankfurt, Philadelphia, and from Philadelphia to Rob's farm. She is scheduled to land at the East Airport at 10 p.m. sharp. The personal driver Duke von Schwarzenberg, an hour and a half before she starts from Trier to Frankfurt. And soon Emily was on her way to the USA. The day raced by in the same breath, and sitting in the cab that was taking her from Ulyanovsk Airport, Emily pondered the possibility that she might lose Rob. What was wrong with him? Are his injuries severe? None of this she knew. All she knew was the hospital he was in. Evelyn texted her. When Emily was still in the sky, falling off her feet from exertion and fatigue, Emily literally fell out of a Yandex cab outside the Central City Hospital. Dragging her suitcases behind her, she passed the emergency room, which for some reason was empty. From somewhere came the music and noise. The fun suddenly came to her. Today is December 31st, New Year's Eve. How could she have forgotten about it? Finally, from the lawsuit countless corridors of the emergency room, a girl in a white coat and handing her a 50 euros bill. Emily, being almost half hysterical, asked to escort her to Rob's room. What was in the trauma ward? A young nurse looked round her eyes at the crazy girl with a suitcase, demanding a date with the patient. But she took the money and walked Emily to the right room. Floor, I don't know. I'm sorry, but I can ask, timidly risked the girl. Emily nodded. Oh, it's almost 12 on New Year's Eve. The girl flustered and hurriedly retreated. Emily quickly proceeded into the ward, throwing her sister's suitcase. The hallway was quiet, and Emily, gathering her courage, prepared to knock on all the doors. She barely put her hand over the door of the first room. It opened, and Emily saw the light on her haggard face in surprise. She flinched so hard that she hurt the glass that carried the light. What happened? Emily heard Rob's faint voice. Emily quickly hugged the light and, without saying anything, burst into the room. The room was single and dark. Only a small boss burned on one bollard. On a high bed that stood in the center of the room lay a man, the most desirable in the world. His head and torso were wrapped in bandages. His left leg was hanging from the hood. He and Emily stared at each other in silence until the fireworks went off outside the windows. Happy New Year, Rob. She cautiously crouched on the edge of the bed and saw that there were tears glistening in his eyes. Happy New Year, Emily, he smiled. You came. What did you think? Through her tears, she laughed. That I would trade you for a foreign prince. He was guilty and silent. My God, what a fool you are. Rob is simply impenetrable. She brought her face close to his. Their lips met at that moment. Emily realized how much she needed him, like air, like light. She had loved him all her life, hiding, running away from her feelings, wasting precious time with the wrong person and the wrong people. She would not make such a mistake again. Rob embraced her gently but powerfully, as if he wanted to show her that he would never let her go anywhere again. "Sweetheart," I was so bored by the door. Looking at them, Jenna stood and cried with happiness. They welcomed spring in Berlin, where Jenna was undergoing immune therapy. Her vitals improved, and the attending physician Emily told them about. Alex soon informed them that the disease had gone into remission. Back in Trier, Emily became more and more attached to her new relatives, who turned out to be crazy about Rob. At the end of March, they were already cuddling at the airport with Jenna, who had come to their engagement party. It was warm and sunny. Nature was waking up from her winter slumber and pleased the eyes with fresh greenery, parks, and squares. In the waiting room, Emily and Rob were holding hands when they saw a familiar figure in the crowd. Taking the huge suitcase from her hands, Rob began to walk through the crowd of greeters and arrivals, and the girls, embracing, followed him. "Do you know who I saw the other day at the women's clinic? Your ex-boyfriend," she whispered in Emily's ear. "He brought his receptionist to the ultrasound, and they were arguing, right in front of the office, because she got the accents wrong. Come to think of it, I said hello, of course, and glimpsed that you had found your German Duke father. You should have seen the look on your future daddy's face that would have stretched." Emily laughed. "Would your face be stretching now?" "Come on," Evelyn squinted his left eye. "You're going to be an auntie and godmother soon enough." "My mother's woman," Evelyn gusted, hugged her friend, and tears spurted from her eyes. Emily, wow. "I'm so happy for you. Hey, what's with the flood?" Rob came over to them and put his arm around both their shoulders. "It's okay, yeah," Emily whispered as she snuggled into his shoulder. "It's definitely okay now." Subscribe and click the bell.
Evelyn was furious. She wanted to tear, throw, and smash the dishes, especially the one his parents had given her and John for their wedding. The exquisite set produced by the famous porcelain factory was not a pity, and it is desirable to break saucers and cups with recognizable cobalt mesh and heads, unfaithful quite the opposite, the husband and his mistress. Well, and let the beautiful porcelain perish, let the cheaters and vile duplicitous person suffer. That's what they should do. Let even I and Evelyn have to answer for this deed, even towards myself, betrayed by the man I loved. There was no pity. The soul was filled with resentment, anger, and a desire to get even with John, who, as it turned out, had not only cheated her, but also wanted to eliminate her. For him, his loving wife was just an unfortunate obstacle on the way to wealth. This Miranda is good too. Ready to be an accomplice to crime to help her lover achieve a dishonest goal. A burning mixture of emotions was pushing Evelyn to reckless action, but the woman with the remnants of prudence realized she couldn't afford to give in to her emotions. Her tantrum would mean victory for that nasty traitor John and his filthy bedfellow Miranda. To allow her own defeat, Evelyn could not allow herself to be defeated. Wow, just 15 minutes ago I was perfectly happy, and now everything in my life has changed so drastically that I'm dizzy. My husband has a mistress, and this is his Miranda, she personally hired, was always satisfied with the employee, and even provided her career growth. When Miranda complained about the deterioration of her health due to work in the kitchen, and said that she would look for a job in the office, she offered her a place as an accountant. Yes, Evelyn, you're a terrible judge of character. The woman scolded herself mentally. Out of all the options, she chose John, the one who had recently heard with his own ears, so cunningly and cold-bloodedly discussing with his mistress a plan to eliminate his wife. I want him to be so cunning and judicious that the law enforcement agencies have no questions for him, because of his wife's premature death. Miranda, yuck, she's giving advice too. Interested in ridding her lover of his legitimate wife? Well, he's good. He wants to arrange the case in such a way as to stay in the maximum benefit. Almost no effort. That's where his law degree comes in handy. Although, as far as I know, John wasn't involved in criminal cases. But I can't say that I know him at all. How could I have ever imagined that in the company of his mistress, my husband would dare to eliminate me? Besides, who knows what kind of connections he has? It's quite possible that this nasty couple will manage to arrange the whole thing so that she, Evelyn, will go to the grave, and they will live happily ever after. Yeah, they're dangerous enemies. That's why we can't let these vile creatures know what they're up to. Otherwise, they will act even more secretly or accelerate the realization of a despicable plan in life. It is necessary to keep a cool head in order to expose the traitors without the possibility of getting away with it. Both John and Miranda must suffer the punishment they deserve for the dastardly deed they have so carefully planned, especially since the price of their success will be her life. An apartment and a little but still already profitable business. And after all, how wonderful and romantic everything began. The upset woman felt that tears were about to flow from her eyes and hastily parked the car in the parking lot in front of the nearest grocery store. Leaning back in her seat, Evelyn sank into her memories. During the period when she had met John, Evelyn's mood had been far from romantic. She was surrounded by the whirlwind of business associated with opening her own cooking shop, which planned to prepare baked goods from homemade recipes. Of course, it was much more complicated than using some already promoted franchise, but it was just such an original bakery she planned to organize together with her childhood friend Molly. Their kind and trusting relationship had developed in high school, and then, although they had scattered to different colleges, they had kept their friendship almost unchanged. It was surprising, but romantic. And often flying in the clouds, Evelyn did not irritate straightforward and pragmatic Molly, and her serious advice often helped to avoid trouble. The tandem of such dissimilar girls was perfect, and in the cafe their roles were distributed long before the opening. Molly, who had a profession of accountant, was ready to take on all money matters because she knew them, and even, surprising her friend, with love and attention, shared the delight of a successful debit and credit. Evelyn, who had been trained as a pastry chef just on the profile of the conceived enterprise, by that time had already worked for several years in a quite decent institution and learned many valuable nuances, about which nothing said teachers in college. With the registration of the company and the initial capital, the girls were greatly helped by their parents. But both Evelyn and Molly put out to the maximum, but it was still difficult. Far not stupid Evelyn very quickly realized that the experience was clearly not enough. Being an employee is much easier than managing everything yourself, but there was nowhere to retreat to, and the girls strived for their goal. On that momentous day, which turned absolutely everything upside down, Molly got sick, and Evelyn had to do the most unproductive thing in the world alone. Waiting, of course, the two of them would have been much more fun, but as it was solo, she tried to fill the time with something useful, cleaning, thinking about the menu again, as if she hadn't devoted nearly a few years to it. However, excitement kept her from concentrating, and the variety of sites on the World Wide Web helped not to agonize over the wait at all. The supplier promised to deliver the ordered furniture in the morning, literally from the moment she got up, but it turned out to be empty words. Evelyn during the day several times called, asked to wait for the car just a little bit. So Evelyn did not go far from the future establishment. She believed that in 15 minutes and then in half an hour, the furniture should finally be brought, but after another reminder, she was informed about the suddenly appeared problem. and as a result, even by lunchtime, nothing had been delivered yet. We managed to wait for the furniture only closer to the evening. The assemblers, however, were clearly skillful and soon departed, leaving behind a nice-looking version of the room. Evelyn was incredibly happy that her long-held idea was about to become a reality. But as soon as she closed the door behind the assemblers, she realized how tired she was. She knew from experience that there were two very opposite ways to regain strength. The easiest, of course, was to eat sweets. However, this option threatened her already not ideal figure, constantly fighting with the extra pounds on her body. Evelyn tried as little as possible to give in to the desire to eat, too disposed to fullness and favorite profession and heredity. So the girl chose an alternative and even healthy way, a walk in the city park, which from time immemorial was called the country park. Although in modern historical reality, it was practically in the center of the regional capital. It was quite close to it from the future cafe. Accordingly, Evelyn, on the advice of her parents, chose this place. The location is good, and the park reminds of carefree childhood, in which visiting the park was a real holiday, even if you went there almost every week during the summer season. Evelyn always looked forward to it with joyful anticipation. On the evening of meeting John, however, the walk seemed to come with a catch. Evelyn had too lightly ignored the clouds in the sky, hoping to complete her promenade before the rain began to fall. The downpour came suddenly, and the trusty umbrella let down, took and broke, refusing to manage its life-saving dome. Evelyn tried to hide under a tree, stretching its crown over the paved path to call a cab, and almost howled in frustration. While the furniture was being assembled, the girl was so worried about the process that she forgot to put her smartphone on the charger. And here is the sad result. Such a necessary gadget now nasty beeped and turned off, discharged to zero. Of course, exactly by the law of meanness, at the most inopportune moment, Evelyn had to hurry to the stop, feeling how not at all in spring cold threads of rain, causing shivering. And then the water stopped raining down on her from above. It turned out that some stranger had sheltered her under his umbrella, nestled next to her, and pacing to the girl's rhythm, the man offered, "Girl, you're probably already soaked, of course, but let me protect you nonetheless." Evelyn was a little confused, but did not reject the help. After all, there were other hurrying park visitors around, and it was not scary at all. Besides, the stranger behaved quite adequately and did not offer anything reprehensible or indecent. Together they reached the public transportation stop. A lot of potential competitors crowded under the awning. Shuttles were passing by, and the streetcar that came by was so packed with passengers that only a few of the most active lucky ones managed to squeeze into the carriages. The stranger introduced himself and explained, "My name is John. You know, I was taught that once you help, you should never give up." Evelyn didn't want to go to her parents' house for the night, so they gave her daughter a ride to the driveway. There, to the girl's surprise, John was waiting for her. He had flowers in his hands, and it so happened that he as if immediately met potential relatives. The man held himself without embarrassment, but apologized to Evelyn's mom and dad. "Jenna and James, I apologize. I didn't think that today I was going to meet you, and I didn't prepare you and your husband appropriate presents. I promised to correct the mistake at our next meetings." Her parents were rather wary of the active, though very courteous John, but they could not influence Evelyn. She was completely enchanted by the man. He quickly became the most necessary person to her. The girl was a little disturbed that the relationship between her lover and Molly was turning out abominably. The girlfriend contemptuously wrinkled her nose when John gave her some compliments and did not hesitate to snap if he dared to make critical remarks. "Look, Evelyn, I understand the lovey-dovey, head-over-heels thing, but don't you notice how strange John's eyes are? It's like he's scanning the person he's talking to for easy and vulnerable weaknesses so that he can strike a devastating blow if he has to. His pupils dilate and constrict to the size of pinheads. Look, I wish you'd be more careful with him. Don't be in such a hurry to let him into your life. Evelyn tried her best to protect her lover. Molly, you're not quite right. I mean, John does have a special, scrutinizing look, but that's just the cost of his former profession. He used to be a police officer, and then he decided to become a lawyer. Don't take offense that he criticizes you. He's just used to telling the truth. That red polka dot dress really turned you into some kind of villager. Remember what we used to say when we were kids? You look like an auntie mother in that dress. Evelyn did not even notice that John really often hurts and pokes, mocks her friend without any good reason. The walks together had stopped almost immediately. The man seemed to be polite, but managed to irritate Evelyn, causing an unpleasant feeling of jealousy because of the numerous and intrusive questions he asked her friend. He was interested in absolutely everything: where she studied, where and with whom she lives, what kind of accounting experience she has, and even in what store she prefers to buy clothes. In the end, he was tired of answering. Molly, who was not known for her humility and patience, burst out. "John, why on earth would you think I'm in your office being interrogated? Look around. We're in the lobby of a movie theater with Evelyn. You give her your attention and leave me alone. I'm sick and tired of your questions. I'm tired of making excuses for something I didn't do." After that, the girl hastily said goodbye to her friend and went home, not listening to the entreaties to stay. Since then, Molly generally tried to avoid communicating with her unpleasant person. Of course, it was impossible to completely exclude meetings, but she tried not to talk to John and even sometimes frankly ignored the questions he asked her. By the fall, the cafe had become a success. There were regular customers, including not too wealthy, but many students from the nearby university. Evelyn was overjoyed. Judging by the figures Molly had shown her, there was already a net profit. It wasn't much, but it was good. "We haven't recouped our investment yet," the accountant reported. "But if things continue at the same pace, then, according to my forecasts, by the beginning of February, we'll recoup everything and work in the plus. I'll have to think about it. Maybe we could do something special for Christmas." Evelyn understood that she had to work even harder so that the stable high income would allow her small team to be proudly recognized as a winner. Therefore, the quality must not be reduced and the assortment must be renewed. Her friend's idea turned out to be successful, and soon technological maps for painted holiday gingerbread were already being developed. Simultaneously with the growth of profits, another joyful event took place. John made Evelyn a proposal to marry him, and she, without playing the popular girlish coquetry, "Olga, I need to think," immediately responded with consent. Molly, on hearing the news, wrinkled her pretty face and gave her friend a shocked expression of her feelings on the subject. "I feel for you, Evelyn. That slippery John is clearly not out of love for you, insisting on getting married." Evelyn was incredibly offended at the time. "So you think I'm impossible to love? Is it because I'm fat? Well, you should know that John is perfectly happy with my figure." Molly tried to justify herself. "I'm not talking about your looks. You're fine with them. Although I noticed that in the morning, instead of a croissant, you chew oatmeal cookies with coffee without adding sugar and cream. I just suggest you take a closer look at how John behaves when he thinks no one can see him. It's like he's doing calculations in his head all the time." Evelyn got defensive about her lover, and finally that conversation ended in an ugly spat between the friends. They almost stopped communicating, except for work matters. However, neither the quarrels with her best friend nor her mother's requests to take a break and think did not affect Evelyn's decision. She perceived doubts in the groom as an insult to her personally. The girl was infatuated with John and married him. The only thing she went against her fiancé in was his desire for a prenuptial agreement. Wide a romantic Evelyn seemed that it lowers the bright feeling of love to a pragmatic deal. John did not insist, but at his gentle request, the gift money was used to buy the family car. Evelyn was not at all embarrassed by the fact that she did not have a driver's license at that time, and in fact, the car became the sole property of her husband. He sometimes drove her to work, but often their schedules didn't coincide. To get to work and back to her apartment, where she now lived with John, she had long been accustomed to public transportation. And her driving school tuition was constantly postponed because she was so busy. Business required constant attention. Competitors were not slumbering, opening nearby establishments of similar orientation. Had to constantly go half a step ahead, not only responding to demand. Gradually, after careful thought and calculation, we came up with new products. Some ideas turned out to be unsuccessful, but in general, the development of the business pleased both the owners and those who received jobs and decent wages. In the process, there were several not too pleasant cases when visitors tried to seek compensation for allegedly substandard products. But John intervened in the proceedings, and everything was settled in a pre-trial manner. For this intercession, Evelyn fell even more in love with the man. He seemed to her a real ideal. However, dissatisfied customers were the exception. Mostly visitors liked the institution, but business partners not satisfied with the results achieved. In the assortment appeared sweets, made for people who adhered to good nutrition. Evelyn, though she was not immediately aware of it, was embarrassed by her sweet, vanilla raisin bun-like figure. She was annoyed by her own rounded knees, her chubby arms, the fat accumulations hiding her waist. Disregarding the advice of her mother, the young woman began to adhere to a strict diet. The regime of calorie deficit not immediately, but still went in favor of the figure, but from the former cheerful character is almost nothing left. Only trust in her husband was unchanged. Over time, Evelyn and Molly decided to expand their own network and open another cafe. Let it again lead to anxiety and turmoil, but there should be development. That's what the friends thought. Of course, Evelyn informed John about the idea, with whom she always shared all the news. "Honey, we have the money to invest in the expansion, although we will probably have to take out a loan to speed up the process." But Molly is optimistic. John, in response, has given his wife the benefit of the doubt. "You know, it seems to me that the cafe should have shown much better results. I don't want to upset you, but if you want my opinion, I'll give it to you." "Of course, John, I'm listening attentively." Evelyn encouraged her lover and heard something she didn't expect. In general, to be honest, without any offense, it is necessary to double-check how it is your kind. Molly keeps accounting. "I think she's taking some of the money out from under your nose, taking advantage of your boundless trust. Opening a new outlet, that's a lot of money to sneak around. She'll collude with the decorating crew. She'll make even more money off your naivete." Evelyn was outraged. "Oh, come on, John. Molly's like a sister to me. We've been friends since high school, and I have confidence in her." The man continued to insist. "I'm telling you, she's stealing profits, happy that you're naive and gullible. She's jealous of you, that's why she's doing it. And I'm afraid that's just the flowers, and she's saving the berries. Well, if Molly decides to punish you financially for your happiness. She once tried to charm me despite you. I regret that I didn't immediately turn on my tape recorder and record her calling you fat and suggesting that I start an affair with her. Evelyn didn't immediately believe her husband. After all, it's not easy to undo a friendship that has lasted more than 17 years. However, John, with the persistence of a man absolutely sure of his own rightness, continued to convince his wife that in the form of Molly, she had a snake in her heart. The second cafe was open, but the renovation of the premises was completely under John's control. Molly often complained to Evelyn that the estimate seemed excessive, but her friend reassured her. John knows what he's doing. Stubborn Molly pointed both her friend and her husband to the lines in the printed table, openly said that some positions are not very real at all, but earned only a contemptuous statement. John: "Well, of course, you only see the numbers. You probably compared the cost of services of some gastarbeiters and the prices of goods taken from old ads. You think you are someone else. What an expert in heels." Molly wanted to get into a verbal fight with her friend's husband, but Evelyn, trying to smooth the conflict, got into the argument. "You know, remember Pushkin's fairy tale. You can't just chase after cheapness. You yourself realize how important for the perfect result are quality materials and a reliable team. These figures also include the conviction that everything will be done quickly, professionally, without unnecessary nervousness for us." John and Molly exchanged hateful glances. The girl called Evelyn her husband a night cuckoo, but did not stop criticizing his actions, causing her friends displeasure. The man also did not lag behind and regularly told his wife that she trusted her smarmy accountant in vain. Everything was complicated by the fact that Evelyn, although she admitted it to herself, hardly envied the slender and incredibly graceful, which without consequences for the figure, dainty buns, and in general had a very attractive appearance. The boat of friendship, rocking more and more strongly, which quite predictably led to disaster. About a year ago, a terribly unpleasant conversation had taken place between the friends. They then sat up in a closed cafe, from which Evelyn left, who had already done her job cleaning lady, and discussed the details of opening a new, already the third branch. John found a place for the establishment and even made a deposit from the family stash. After Molly said that the man offered a knowingly failed option, located in an unsuccessful neighborhood and obviously not for the simplicity of heart, overpaid, Evelyn took offense for her beloved and told her friend everything that accumulated on her soul. She even mentioned Molly's signs of attention to her husband. For a few seconds after the verbal outpourings of her friend, Molly was silent and then grinned. "Evelyn, I'm sorry, but everything you just said is complete nonsense. I swear I have no interest whatsoever in your precious John. More to the point, I despise him, and even kind of hate him for the way he's managed to shake our friendship to the state it's in now. Your John, pardon my bluntness, he's an opportunist as cunning and thoughtful as a nesting cuckoo. He systematically destroys all competitors for resources, remaining the only and favorite. You yourself think with your head. He lives on your territory, drives a car which is registered to him, but bought with your money. You almost completely updated his closet. Remember at your leisure and count how much he contributes to the budget of your family. In fact, it's time you opened your eyes. Can't you see that this John of yours is just pitting us against each other? How can you be so naive? If we're having this conversation, John was trying to flirt with me, not me with him. But it didn't work out, so I told him to fuck off. When that stunt didn't work, he decided to eliminate me from the people you trust. Well, I'll tell you what. I vouch for my work. Everything in our business is good with accounting. Even an additional independent audit you can order. But I'm warning you, it's a waste of money. If all you care about is John's peace of mind, then we're not going anywhere. I'm sick and tired of him meddling in everything, even in matters he has no idea about, and turning you against me. So along with the accounting firm, get an accountant. After this total distrust, it's unlikely we'll be able to continue working as before." How then Evelyn was angry, indignant, and a little frightened. After all, John had warned her that this was exactly how Molly would respond. So her husband was right about everything else. The audit was conducted. No irregularities were found. And no matter how hard Evelyn tried to talk her friend out of quitting, Molly was adamant. The question of her share in the business was also solved when Evelyn, with the help of John of course, stammered that she was ready to pay a certain amount. In addition to the share of authorized capital, the girl agreed, although in her eyes was clearly visible contempt. "I hope you realize what you're doing." Coldly, Molly said, "I refuse my participation in the business and leave the founders only because I do not want to have anything to do with the family, which is ruled by a despicable man. I just want to give you one last warning. Don't dissolve into him. He's not the kind of man you can trust unconditionally." As it seemed so convenient at the time, Miranda, the pastry chef, told the owner of the cafe that her health was making it difficult for her to work in the kitchen. She took Molly's place, and Evelyn simple-mindedly all this year did not even think about the fact that everything was somehow successful and well put together. She just had no time to think again, and she couldn't suspect her husband. She still loved him blindly. John had become everything she could be: lover, friend. There was no one in the spacious hall, and the woman was ready to shout a greeting, but suddenly she heard her husband's voice in the hall, potentially suitable for the kitchen. Not understanding what had come over her, Evelyn tiptoed closer and realized that John was speaking not to the builders, but to his mistress, and it seemed to be her, his lawful wife. "Most of all now I regret that in due time I did not persuade this cow in love to sign the contract. I would have laid it out so well that it would have been hard for her to figure it out, and after the divorce she would have been left with nothing. Then you and I would be on fire, but for now, it's just the way it is." The familiar female voice, which Evelyn easily recognized as her accountant Miranda's, rebuked her crankily. "Let's at least go out tonight. Go for a walk or rent an apartment, shall we?" "It's a bit extreme." John sighed expressively. "Oh, Miranda, I'd invite you over. But my wife's mother might show up at the apartment at the worst possible moment. Her lovely daughter will be here tomorrow, and she'll think of all sorts of fatty goodies. She herself is fat, and she has raised her daughter the same way." Miranda's voice spoke again. "Well, John, you're not quite fair. Yours has lost a lot of weight lately." Unaware that Evelyn was standing a few meters away from him, John laughed. "Well, scrawny cow, not yet a quivering doe. Sagging skin, though she's trying to do some exercises, but she's got a nasty temper. That's like you, not a woman, but a feast of the soul. And body." Miranda said flirtatiously. "Yes, Miranda and body. I myself would like to enjoy your company in a comfortable environment, but for now I have to hide. But that's okay, we'll bury this fatty and take every penny." Evelyn held on only on moral willpower. There was a great desire to appear in front of her lovers and express their indignation, not shy in expressions. However, the next phrase Miranda literally made stick to the floor. "No, John, it is desirable to cremate Evelyn. Then we can live without fear. After all, in that case, no one will be able to find out the real reason for your widowhood." There was both admiration and something like fear in John's voice as he answered his mistress. "You're a dangerous little thing, Miranda. Do you watch too many detectives? You're right. Cremation is the perfect way to hide the ends, but not in water, but in fire. I'll probably have to talk to her parents about burial arrangements, but I think I can convince them that the option I'm proposing makes sense. It is unpleasant that they too will be heirs of the first turn, but it is also solvable. Again, from the loss of my beloved only daughter, there's not much that can happen. I believe you will think of everything in the best way. Miranda squealed enthusiastically. There was the sound of kissing, and instinctively recoiling from the revulsion that seized her, Evelyn caught a water bottle lying on the floor, which must have been left by the builders. "Oh, John," Miranda exclaimed, "I think I heard some noise in the next room." "Oh, come on, it's nothing. The builders are long gone. Maybe a mouse from the slackness of unscrupulous exterminators survived." John began to calm his mistress. "I think you just imagined it, but don't be nervous and don't get distracted. We'd have more pleasant things to do than chase mice, my kitty." Evelyn even covered her mouth with her hand to keep from screaming with resentment and disgust at the luscious tone of John's voice. Miranda continued to insist. "John, please go and see what's out there. I can't relax thinking that someone is around or even peeking at us." Not waiting for Miranda to persuade John to check the room, Evelyn hurried away quietly, so as not to let on that she was here and had overheard such an unpleasant conversation. Wiping away her tears, Evelyn picked up her phone and looked online to verify her husband's words. It was just as he had said. Since they hadn't decided to have a child yet, if something happened, her parents and the cunning, sneaky John would be the first-line heirs. The woman was horrified. So her mom and dad are also at risk. There was no doubt left. One must strike a preemptive strike against the traitors. Can't risk her parents, can't worry them either. Going home and pretending to John that she missed him, that she was happy to see him, and that everything between them was still the same, Evelyn was in no condition. Ironically, the only person to whom the woman treacherously betrayed by her supposedly loving husband and seemingly reliable employee could turn for help was Molly. Except, as a once resentful friend, would treat the request to at least listen and offer sound advice. Almost without breathing, Evelyn listened to the long beeps, and then finally, a vigorous greeting came from the speakers. "Hello, Molly. Please forgive me for everything. You were completely right. I'm in such a situation that I'm scared, terribly scared. Please meet me. I can't tell you everything over the phone." Molly had forgiven her friend, or she was gloating. Evelyn didn't care. What mattered was that she heard the words that were so important to her. "All right, come on over. You probably haven't forgotten the address. My parents are on vacation, by the way, or they probably wouldn't let you in." Unlike her friend, Molly did not want to live separately from her mom and dad. She thought with her rational mind that there was no point in getting involved in mortgage bondage, and it is better to save the necessary amount, little by little, so as not to overpay. Soon Evelyn was already sitting in the cozy kitchen and under the ticking of the antique clock, which since the childhood of her girlfriends were already in this very place, and having told about her problem, summed up. That's the story. You can rightfully say that you warned me about not trusting John completely. I was wrong, and now I'm surprised I didn't notice what kind of person he really is. I guess the whole staff knows about his affair with Miranda, except for me. Molly shook her head as she listened to her friend without interrupting. "Even I didn't expect this from your husband, even though I've seen that he's a real scoundrel without principles or morals. I didn't think he'd be willing to do such a thing for profit. But I can't imagine how you're going to do it. Most likely the time is very little, because they have already decided everything, judging by what you say. I'm sorry, I'm not gonna say the nicest things. But since they're agreeing on cremation, It's likely that poisoning will be the method of your elimination. Probably the best solution would be to move out of your own apartment for a while and strictly forbid any food or drink from John and Miranda's hands. But there's a catch. Your enemies may not slip the poison directly, but simply place it within reach. Going to the police is probably useless and maybe even more dangerous than dealing with John on your own. I understand you didn't make a tape of the conversation between your husband and his mistress. And on top of all that, he may still have friends among the police. It's your word against his word, so it's a pretty good bet. John is a lawyer, and things may not work out in your favor. I'm also concerned that your parents are at risk. Even if you leave, as if on a long business trip or on vacation, they can override their plan and take care of Jenna's uncle and aunt, who, if it happened to you, would be heirs of the first turn. Feel sorry for them, and frankly for you too. You got yourself into this John of yours. Now you're gonna have to work hard to get out of it without getting hurt. So you can't run away, and it's dangerous to make a scandal right now. I don't know how the sweet couple of lovers will act then. We will have to win by cunning, but we must think it over very well. The friends began to think over the options, but the conversation was interrupted by Evelyn's call. It was John. Answer it, but don't talk to him for long, or he'll be able to sense something wrong from your voice. Tell him you're tired and you're going to bed. Molly whispered her advice for some reason. John spoke to Evelyn sweetly and sympathetically. She almost began to doubt that she had recently heard with her own ears how her husband dreamed of the happy life of a rich widower, just as her friend had advised. The woman was more silent than speaking, and seeing the eloquent glance to wrap up, quickly ended the conversation by imitating a yawn. John, I am terribly tired today. See you tomorrow. Making sure the call ended, Evelyn put the smartphone down on the table and grimaced, trying to hold back the tears that were bursting out. How could anyone lie so perfectly? If I didn't know he was dreaming of getting rid of me, I'd actually believe what he said about the separation being unbearable for him. Lies, so cynical, deceives, so unprincipled, speaks tender words, even with the slightest intonation, without revealing his true feelings and desire to destroy me. What kind of man is he? Molly consoled a friend who had almost become an ex for good. Unfortunately, it was obvious to everyone but you that your chosen one was a fruit. You didn't listen to anyone's advice, but there's no time to regret the past. You have to do something in the present, so as not to get into an even more difficult situation. Evelyn was horrified at how Molly was calmly studying the situation and only managed to ask something. What am I supposed to do? Molly continued to reason, saying everything with a stride so as not to unnerve her friend. First of all, you should not panic. It won't help and may even harm you. I'm afraid that with the active assistance of Miranda, John has insured himself and withdrawn to secret accounts, probably opened on someone else's data, an impressive amount of money. Of course, if they expect to eliminate you completely, maybe they didn't make unnecessary movements. What's the use of making a fuss, and in case of unfavorable circumstances, risk being caught? If after a short wait, you can get a much bigger payoff. Anyway, the first point of our plan is to find out the details of their conspiracy. We need information like air, but only time, as I understand it, is short, catastrophic. I cannot even think of the right thing to do. Probably, it will be better to be reinsured, and your parents should be sent somewhere on vacation until everything is resolved. It will be necessary to lie low, to catch all the oddities, to reliably denounce the traitors. It would be nice to be able to listen in on John's conversations. But unfortunately, I don't know anyone who can get such equipment quickly. Do you? Evelyn shook her head. Neither do I. Besides, to be honest, I'm not at all sure I can play the part of a loving wife knowing John's meanness. I'm both scared and disgusted at the same time. Molly questioned the reliability of the strategy she had devised. Yeah, I didn't realize that. You have everything on your face as well as on the screen, so we have to go to the bank. And the key to this scenario is surprise and a support group. Ideally, tomorrow morning, when John comes out of your apartment, by the way, the locksmith called by you urgently changes the locks. It is unlikely that your husband has had time. Poison added to your favorite coffee or other foods that only you consume. But categorically, I would not exclude such a possibility. So Evelyn better update your grocery stockpile for good measure. Next, to catch Miranda by surprise, you need to somehow lure her out of her workplace so that she, unsuspecting, has no time to clean up unwanted data or even delete it altogether. Well, next you file for divorce and the procedure of property division begins. Perhaps it will be problematic, but it will be a battle, as they say, with an open mind. On accounting, if you still trust me, I can check everything or independent auditor's order. I think the chances of success are quite real. You could file a police report just in case John makes an attempt on your life, but he'll probably be afraid to act directly. Evelyn confessed. Molly, I prefer the second option. I can't play that kind of game. Molly shrugged. Well, that's fine. You're a straightforward and honest person, though you're easily influenced. So now let's go to bed, and tomorrow we'll do great things. Let's make a prior arrangement with the locksmith to have a locksmith on standby. Evelyn didn't know how to thank her friend, who had managed to forget the bitter insult she had suffered. All words seemed pathetic and empty. She was stunned by the breadth of Molly's soul and apologized again for having jeopardized a long-standing friendship because of a man who turned out to be a scoundrel. In the morning, Molly warned the head of the firm where she worked that she would appear at lunchtime, and together with Evelyn went to her apartment. John was already gone, and while the locksmith arrived to change the lock of the friend, they sorted out the products that could potentially be dangerous. They put jars and boxes into bags, and then got busy dumping John's belongings into suitcases. By the time the hired man handed the landlady a set of keys, everything was packed. After locking up the apartment, the girls drove to their first cafe, which had once been their joint project. On the way, Evelyn sent a text message to her accountant asking her to drive up to the building where the renovations were taking place. After making sure Miranda had left, the girlfriends entered the premises. Molly immediately began to study the information on the computer, since her successor had not even bothered to change the password. Evelyn, meanwhile, dialed the number of her mother, whom she didn't dare to upset last night, briefly explained the situation to her, and asked her not to answer John and his parents' calls if possible, and to leave town for a while or at least take care of the security measures. Evelyn, don't worry about us. We've been through worse than this. If anything, be sure to call us, we'll help you. Give my love and thanks to Molly. Your father and I will be there tonight, and even sooner if necessary. Evelyn thanked her mom and promised to keep her in the loop. She ended the conversation. Molly had by now found the documents necessary to expose the dishonest accountant and change the password on the computer so that Miranda, when she came to her senses, would not be able to fix anything. The bustling life of the cafe went on as usual, and the staff had no idea that a real coup was underway. Jean was very surprised when he heard from Evelyn, who called him that she was filing for divorce. That's a very funny joke, my love, but today I dare remind you it's not April 1. Well, I've got a lot to do, so you can explain at home tonight what went through your charming head. All right, kisses, my puffy. Evelyn looked at her friend in bewilderment. He didn't think I was serious about the divorce. Molly grinned not too kindly. He's sure you're still madly in love with him. But as far as I can tell, he's probably on the phone with his mistress at this very moment to see what's going on. The nasty couple will be here soon. Most likely they will come one at a time. Molly wasn't wrong. The friends had barely had time to sip a cup of coffee with the novelty of the menu when John appeared in the office. The man's handsome face, for a split second, contorted with a grimace when he saw his wife in Molly's company. However, he instantly took control of his emotions and said hello to his wife and then to her friend. "Evelyn, I insist that you explain to me what happened on the business trip. Except this conversation is clearly not for anyone's ears. Molly, do you have the decency to leave me alone with my wife? She and I have a lot to discuss." Evelyn asked. "John, we can't talk alone. If you want, let's discuss what you wanted to discuss. I'm listening to you carefully." The man was puzzled, but decided to ignore the woman who always put him off balance and raised his hands in the air, as if in a sign of joking capitulation, clarified. "What's this unfortunate divorce joke?" Evelyn spoke calmly, although it was necessary to clench her fists to the point of whitening her knuckles. "No, John, I'm not kidding at all. We're getting a divorce, and it's finalized. I don't want to say why out loud. Besides, you know them very well. Tell me, what time can you come and get your things?" John was not going to give up without a fight, and Evelyn, who had overheard his conversation with his mistress, understood why. It wasn't enough for him what he would have gotten in a fair divorce. He wanted to take a bite out of the family pie, a bigger and tastier piece. This comparison, unintentionally brought to mind, helped the woman even listen to her unfaithful husband with some humor. "Evelyn, I don't understand anything. I can only guess that Molly is involved in this whole situation. Beloved, if you want my opinion, such interference in purely family matters is out of line." Suddenly, Evelyn was even amused. "Well, my love, and I thought that you would dare to call me a fat cow or a skinny cow." The fright seen in her husband's gaze gave the woman confidence, and she continued, "You're mistaken if you think that Molly or anyone else but yourself is to blame for our divorce. I can't live with you anymore because you are a cheater, a traitor, and a two-faced man. You have completely lost my trust. So let me know when you can come get your stuff, and let's finish this useless conversation with you." John, that's self-control. That's chutzpah. Noticing her friend's confusion, Molly entered the unpleasant conversation. "I'm not going to moralize. It seems useless. Actually, the grounds for termination of the employment contract is more than enough. So, Miranda, it is better not to threaten, but to choose a less painful option of parting with your job. If you think about it, you'll realize Evelyn's suggestion is a real mercy. Most businessmen in her position, an accountant like you would have a fun life of litigation. And from the looks of it, John would hardly rush to the rescue. So you wonder what to do." Blushing, Miranda stalked out of the office. Her lover's behavior clearly indicated that he was not going to support her. John looked at Molly with hatred and then turned to Evelyn. "Okay, I get it. You need to chill out a bit. I'll drive up to the house tonight around 8:00 p.m., and we can talk in peace and hopefully without witnesses. By the way, Molly, why don't you get on with your personal life and stay out of ours?" The man left the office, slamming the door. Soon Molly, asking her friend to hold on, went to her workplace asking, "Shall I come up to your place tonight?" "I don't think you should go out alone with that creep. He's not going to be able to come up with anything." Evelyn shook his head. "Thanks, Molly. I guess it's not really necessary. My parents are coming over tonight, and you've done so much for me already. although I'd love to see you. Maybe when the unpleasant part of John's visit is over, we can sit and talk like we used to." Molly looked at the screen of her smartphone and hurriedly said goodbye. "You know, I also missed our communication. I'll try to drive up without being late. I'm afraid John won't want to pick up his stuff peacefully. So if it's okay with you, I'm gonna take Robert with me. You remember him?" Evelyn, of course, remembered the classmate who was always trying to drive a wedge, but always failing. "Honestly, I didn't know he was in town. Didn't he leave? Anyway, sure, come by. We'll have a little reunion, and my parents will be happy. Plus, it'll put everyone in a different mood. Robert always knows how to be inconspicuous and the indispensable center of any company. I still wonder why you keep him at a distance, to be honest." Molly didn't answer the question, and making sure that her friend's thoughts were at least a little distracted from her troubles, she hurried away. She was indeed already almost late for work. John had prepared a real gentleman's set of reconciliation for the evening meeting with Evelyn, bringing with him a huge bouquet of her favorite flowers, a bottle of champagne, a decent brand, a baguette, and caviar. The man expected that the woman would not resist his charm and eloquence, as well as the delicacy, and with difficulty he suppressed a sigh of disappointment when the key failed to fit the lock. Because of this unexpected obstacle, his mood soured dramatically, but there was nothing to be done. He had planned to make peace with his wife, to beg her forgiveness so he could eliminate her later. Had to stand in front of the door, calming down, and wanted to get over his anger. When the rage-infused breath came back to normal, John pressed the call button. The fact that Evelyn was not alone in the apartment was another unpleasant surprise. His wife's parents stood behind their daughter's back with eloquent glances. But he, as if not noticing the bags and boxes in the hallway, said hello, crossed the threshold and spoke. "Evelyn, my love, we should at least try to negotiate this peacefully. And you've called in a whole support group. I meant it kindly. I meant it nicely. Maybe there's no reason for us to break up. I love you, you love me. Why do we need a divorce? Well, things happen in life. We all fall short of the ideal. We have to be able to correct our mistakes and work on our family relationships. Do you want me to confess my love to you in front of your parents? I'm still crazy about you. And you're all business, all business. So I've made a mistake. What man doesn't have an easy affair? I swear, my love, I swear on anything. I'll never look at another man again. What do you think?" Evelyn was shocked for the umpteenth time by the behavior, so far, of her husband. How calmly he speaks, with flowers, with a bag. So confident in his charm and the success of the visit. He calls me his favorite. God, how can I get through this meeting without crying in front of this scoundrel? Evelyn grinned unhappily and answered, "Here's what I'm thinking, John. How did I manage to marry such a lying monster? Only about 24 hours ago, you and your mistress were planning to eliminate me quietly. And now you're trying to make a good impression, make up. You even swear, as sincere as it may seem, that you'll be faithful. Good thing I didn't say, 'till death do us part.' In the context of what I heard last night, that wouldn't even be funny. Get your stuff and get out of my life. Just so you know, if you do bad things, you'll be dealt with. Take your chances for a peaceful resolution." The irritation that John tried so hard to conceal came out. "I take it these bags, so kindly packed to avoid wasting my time, contain only clothes. Actually, as an official husband, I'm entitled to some of the equipment too." "Evelyn, did you really expect me to just take the clothes? But that's not even serious. You can't equate nobility with stupidity. I'll take everything I'm legally entitled to, so if you don't want to waste your nerves We'll settle this amicably. Here's how it works. I'll take everything I'm entitled to, and we'll have a quiet divorce." Evelyn's father intervened in the conversation. "Dear son-in-law, you seem to have a law degree. Remind me, what is the penalty for planning to commit a crime, a group of persons by prior conspiracy? You still want to take the equipment? What would you need it for in prison? Can you give me a hint?" While John considered how to counter this more than serious accusation, Robert, whom he didn't even notice at first, almost under his elbow, but without using brute force, led the man out of the apartment of his almost ex-wife. Following in the stairwell were out of the bag. Separately, Evelyn took out a boxed set, presented at the wedding by her mother-in-law. Then she ran back into the room and brought out a sturdy bag containing the game console she'd once given her adoring husband. "Here's John. There's also discs in the bag. Play, have fun, but don't even try to reconnect with me. It's over. I realize you're a fool for your integrity, but please don't bother me again. Enough for the sake of all the good, bright, joyful things between us. There's no need for any more of this." John answered nothing and abruptly taking, almost snatching from Evelyn's hands, the objects dear to him, turned around and went to the elevator. Yes, going to meet his wife, he had expected a very different result. During the day, when Evelyn had uttered unflattering epithets, he had hoped that someone from the staff had told her about the hurtful words. Now it was clear his wife had found out about the insidious plan to eliminate her. Apparently, Miranda was right to be worried about the strange noise. "I should have gone yesterday to see what was going on. Maybe the situation would have turned out in his favor." Now the only thing left to do was to pack her bags and go to her mistress. Unlike John, who had been practically escorted out, the people left in Evelyn's apartment were in good spirits. Jenna and James, speaking in turn, suggested, "Stay with us for a while, Evelyn, while things calm down. In fact, let's all come over to our place now. We have specialty dumplings. We made a freezer full just yesterday." Robert smiled broadly, instantly remembering the hospitality of his former classmate's house. He didn't answer, however, leaving it up to Evelyn and Molly to decide. Evelyn and Molly looked at each other and nodded synchronously. Indeed, her apartment, betrayed by her husband, the woman now perceived desecrated. She decided to make repairs, at least cosmetic, and rearrange the furniture. She wanted to update the furnishings as much as possible so that nothing reminded not too long marriage. Having voiced her thoughts, the woman received the enthusiastic support of relatives and friends. Robert promised that in the near future he would call a reliable acquaintance who is engaged in repairs and will be able to carry out updates without nerves. Evelyn was grateful to her parents, who, sensing her mood, did not leave her alone and even arranged a small but well-fed and cheerful feast. After a little sitting with the young people, the hosts went to their room, and the 3 former classmates were engrossed in memories of funny school pranks. "Listen, Robert, what made you come back to the city of your childhood? There were rumors that you opened a hotel complex somewhere in the South." Evelyn asked. The rumors were right, but as always, a little distorted. "I was actually living in the South, renovating my grandparents' house. My parents live there now, and they like the climate better than here. I also put a guest house on the plot so that my sister's family would have an autonomous dwelling. This building is far from being a hotel complex. Yes, and not for profit it was built, but without too much modesty to say, very cozy turned out. But I didn't want to stay there in the South forever. I have a heartfelt interest here. I lived a little away and realized that I can't go on. I've had enough of being a bachelor. And I'm tired of being afraid that someone more brazen will steal her away. Finally, I'm so happy for you guys. Of course, I'll organize a wedding cake of your choice and design. Just tell me what date." The evening, which had started so tense, even unpleasantly ended with a pleasant conversation discussing the details of the wedding. Evelyn was pleased for her friend and cautiously asked, "Molly, do you want to work with me again? In addition to a salary and a percentage of sales will be. Of course, I understand that you need to think about it. Well, if you don't want to, maybe you can recommend someone." Molly didn't lie. "You know, I think everything always works out for the best. This job that I have, I'm happy with it. And frankly, there's one more thing that's stopping me." Molly was silent, and then she turned to Robert. "Can I tell you one more of our secrets?" After a kiss on the cheek, which was decoded as permission, Molly told her friend about her pregnancy. "Well, that's the reason we decided to rush the wedding. Kind of like having the baby in a legal marriage. So, there's no point in you hiring me. Maternity pay and sick leave, then let me go with the baby." Evelyn was glad that Molly and Robert, who had been waiting for her favor for so long, had settled down, and wished them nothing but happiness in her life. Things were complicated, however. John's parents overpowered her, persuading her both on the phone and in person that Evelyn must necessarily forgive her straying husband. Cindy's mother-in-law came to her almost ex-sister-in-law at work and began to lament to Evelyn, "Why are you mad at John? All men cheat, but some men manage to hide their affairs. John's an honest guy. He's not in the habit of lying. You should appreciate that. So right now in front of me, call and make an appointment with him." She's offended. If you ask me, Oscar Wilde was right when he said that resentment is the lot of maids. People who are self-confident don't allow themselves to feel that way. Enough of this nonsense. As far as I know, John is already desperate and does not even expect you to respond favorably to his initiatives. Why don't you take steps toward reconciliation? Think about it. You're 25 years old. Not exactly the freshest commodity on the marriage market. Divorced, even without a trailer. It's still not good enough. All you've got is an odd business in a field where competition is huge and ruin at any moment threatens, and arrogance. So pick up the phone, make the call. What are you waiting for? Evelyn, tired of listening to moralizing, gloomy forecasts, veiled remarks, insults, direct orders. So she said, "Dear Cindy, that's enough. I have endured listening to you for a long time, but I will not be silent any longer. I'm not divorcing your wonderful son just because he was having an affair behind my back with an accountant. I don't know how John put it to you, but cheating is nothing. What I never expected when I got married was that my spouse would get so tired of me that he would plan to physically eliminate me, and then bury me, or better yet, turn me to ashes. You should be glad I didn't report him and his girlfriend to the police. Not even those traitors, but you and your husband. It's hard to imagine what respectable parents can feel when they find out they raised a scoundrel. I hope you realize now that I will not call you, let alone reconcile with your son." Cindy said her goodbyes and left. Evelyn mentally reproached herself for not holding back and telling her mother-in-law the hard truth. But now she could be sure that there would be no more requests for reconciliation from her. Divorce and division of property was not smooth. However, with the help of an experienced lawyer who was recommended by Evelyn Robert, she managed to keep the entire chain of establishments. John gritted his teeth, as it was possible to prove the fact of repeated misappropriation of money from the accounts of his wife, Miranda. The man had to help his mistress out of this delicate situation because she promised to keep silent about the crime that they were planning. In fact, it turned out that John, after 3 years of married life, had only acquired a car. In addition, He had to move out of the cozy Evelyn apartment. With his parents, after the truth was revealed to his mother, he quarreled. Avoiding to upset her husband, Cindy did not tell him about the meanness that her son was planning. But the man was not happy without it and reprimanded John for parting with his clever wife. Miranda, her lover's parents, took it in stride. She, right at the time of acquaintance, capriciously declared that the negative attitude to himself is not going to tolerate, and John had to urgently look for a conveniently located rental apartment. Since the one rented by his mistress was far from the office, the man had to leave some of his things at his parents' place. Cindy, sorting out the bags and boxes at her son's request, sighed bitterly when she discovered that several teacups had been damaged during the move. So believed the omens about broken dishes and good luck. The woman thought. She felt sorry for her son, but even more ashamed of Evelyn for his unfortunate scheme. Indeed, such a thing from John, whom she and her husband had tried to bring up properly, a good man, she could not have expected in any way. There was nothing wrong for Evelyn in her new status as a divorcee, as her mother-in-law characterized it. The woman felt free and even happy. She decided to get rid of the room where she had overheard Joan talking to Miranda. Of course, it wasn't the Walls' fault that they were silent witnesses to a nefarious plan, but she didn't want to be constantly reminded of the negativity. She had to pay a small penalty to the owners, but Evelyn canceled the lease with the opening of the third cafe. The woman decided not to be in a hurry, but to pay close attention to the existing one, and without rushing to look for a new premises, the location of which will be more successful, thanks to the fact that Molly gladly accepted from Evelyn help in preparing for the wedding celebration. In the first month after the divorce was no time to think about how to continue to live after the terrible betrayal. In addition, it was necessary to look after the repair of the apartment, and of course, with particular trepidation, Evelyn and her assistants worked on the wedding cake. The products were not of the most standard type, but no one from the team was intimidated by the difficulties. As a result, the cake turned out to be a real work of art and became not only a wonderful decoration, but also an excellent dessert. Evelyn, although worried about her brainchild, had fun, as did the other guests. And she wished Molly and Robert well from the bottom of her heart. She was pleased to feel the gentle atmosphere of other people's happiness, and for the first time since she had met them, she felt nothing else but joy for their old acquaintances. There was no resentment and anger, no disappointment and despair. She was completely free of resentment. It was truly a wonderful feeling. Evelyn was learning to move on with her life. Though her parents did not kick her out of the apartment where the woman's childhood had been spent, she moved in. The kitchen and bathroom were barely renovated. I can sleep on the kitchen sofa, and in the daytime I am not at home, so there will be no inconvenience. The team of specialists, recommended by Robert's acquaintances, really worked qualitatively and quickly, and at the final settlement, Evelyn asked Mason, the main one from the team, "In about 3 months, or a little more, I will need to do some renovations in the room that will be used as a cafe pastry shop. There will, of course, be some nuances involved with both the finishes and the purpose of the room. Is it okay if I offer you such a job?" Mason was happy to respond, "Sure. If you want, I can visit the site soon, estimate the scope of work, preliminary estimate, of course. How long will it take to repair and the approximate cost?" "The thing is that there is no object yet," Evelyn admitted. "I can't find a room that meets all my requirements." When asked by the foreman about what the woman wants so special, she said that the location is important to her, what institutions are located in the neighborhood, the condition of the building and communications, and of course, the cost of rent. And then she suddenly came to her senses and laughed. "Oh, I'm holding you up. I got carried away." Sorry, have a good day." The foreman, saying goodbye, promised to let me know if he heard about such an ideal room from Evelyn's point of view. The woman took it as a gesture of simple politeness. But a week later, she did receive a call from Mason. The man offered an option that seemed fabulous to Evelyn. After hearing the address, however, she grew sad. "Thank you, Mason, for your trouble. But in that neighborhood, the cost of rent is too high for me." However, the man insisted that Evelyn should definitely call the owner. "The owner's phone number is William. I'll text it to you right now. The interesting thing is that once 10 years ago, I was one of those who did the finishing work in this room. Call, maybe you can negotiate a discount. About your desire to open a cafe in a place like this, I told him briefly. In general, try, after all, for the demand for money do not take money." Evelyn thanked the inadvertent helper in the search of the premises, and barely after receiving the message, made a call. William had indeed been alerted by Mason, but offered to meet for a detailed discussion directly at the premises the woman was interested in. Evelyn suggested that the businesslike conversation, which had begun with a discussion of the details of the contract, continue at one of her 2 cafes. "William, I think you will be able to understand that your premises are optimally suited to my wishes and purpose." The imposing man agreed, but after the meal he grinned and said, "Evelyn, everything was delicious, and you are a real pro in the culinary arts. I'm sorry, but you're being very naive when it comes to negotiating a lease. Why are you making your interests so obvious? It's only natural that it would increase the rent, but I'm not going to profit from you." The man made a good discount, and after a while he became a guest of the new establishment. Not immediately, but a romantic relationship began between William and Evelyn. On the anniversary of the opening, the cafe was closed. Inside celebrated the wedding of newlyweds, whose destinies were linked by this room. 10 years later, William and Evelyn had a son and a daughter. The woman was happy, and about her unsuccessful first marriage, practically did not remember, until her cart collided with another cart at the supermarket. Evelyn began to apologize and was surprised to see Miranda standing in front of her. There was almost nothing left of the former beauty. Even her eyes had recently turned bright blue, as if they'd been watered down. Undoubtedly, she recognized her lover's ex-wife too, because she pushed Evelyn's cart and followed her. John, once so trim, turned from the perpendicular row of racks on which were located, according to the sign "Beer and Snacks," a stooped, gaunt man, who seemed to have fallen firmly under Miranda's heel, caused Evelyn's bewilderment. Had I ever been so hurt by his betrayal? The woman mentally even thanked fate for the pain she had to go through. But now, everything was perfect.